Chapter 276. A few years ago, when he could only eat one meal at a time, it was already good enough to have a bowl of porridge during Chinese New Year. Now that he was not short of money, he could not continue living like that. Shopping for Chinese New Year goods was a must. After walking around the streets, Li Yi could not carry all the things he bought with his 2 hands. "Martial uncle, let me carry it." The girl who insisted on becoming Rui's disciple hurried over and said. Unknowingly, he had grown up a generation. Li Yi enjoyed being called martial uncle, but he still shook his head to show his refusal. Although the girl seemed to want to be Rui's disciple, her master did not agree. As the martial uncle, he could not overstep his boundaries and do things for her. Mississippi Lu did not agree, nor did she chase her away. The girl simply followed them. She did not put down the sword in her hand, but the small bag on her back was left at home. Without a third hand, when they walked to another street, Li Yi could no longer carry anything in his hands. He bought a fish from the fish shop and was going to make sweet and sour fish at home. The girl took the fish from Xiao Huan at the right time and held it in her hand, then retreated to the back without saying a word. The young maidservant glanced at her. She only knew that this young lady wanted to become the second young Miss disciple, but the second young Miss had not agreed yet. It seemed a little inappropriate to let her carry things. Just as she was about to refuse, she turned her head and saw Li Yi, who was covered in things. "Young master, let me help you carry some." She hurried over to help Li Yi. After all, Xiao Huan cared for him, unlike Mississippi Lu, who was carefree and only wanted to buy the things she liked, but her hands were always empty. Since he already carried a fish, he did not mind letting her carry more things. With half of his luggage taken away, he felt much more relaxed and had the energy to think about other things. The creation of the Wulin hero ranking was naturally not done on a whim, nor did it take up too much of a factor. As for Zhao Yuanwei, he was just randomly assigned a position. It was believed that it would not be long before he was kicked off the ranking, but before that, something unexpected might happen to him. The people of the martial arts world loved fame. The brothels would try their best to perfect their information. Yesterday, Hero Wang of Anxi County carried an old man in his 80s across the river. The next day, it would become a topic of great interest to the people. Hero Zhao molested a woman in the streets of Qingyan Prefecture. Within a few days, this scandal would spread throughout the martial arts world. Of course, to achieve better results, he had to pay more attention to the details. Men would be silent while women would cry. What did Hero Qin do to cause the wrath of the heavens and the people? Was it the distortion of human nature or the degeneration of morality behind this incident? Welcome to Old Sun's commentary on Jianghu. I'll see you there tomorrow. Ancient people who had not been poisoned by the circle of friends would not be able to resist such a title. The more righteous a person was, the more they cared about their reputation. Heroes used their martial arts to break the law. Most of the evil deeds were done by people with high martial skills. As the lieutenant of a county, Li Yi had to do something to maintain the peace and order of the area under his jurisdiction. Of course, this method would not work on the infamous bandits in Jianghu who did not care about their reputation. Instead, it would spread their bad reputation even further and increase their arrogance. At this time, it was necessary to bring some positive energy to the murky Wulin. Master Zhang, who was ranked 36th on the chivalrous leaderboard, broke into a bandit's lair alone and killed more than 10 bandits with his own hands. He got rid of a big scourge in Jianghu. According to the latest strength assessment, Master Zhang's ranking rose by 2 places and became 34th on the heavenly leaderboard. The Qingzhou caravan was kidnapped by bandits. Master Qin and Master Li saw injustice and wiped out the bandits. However, they were seriously injured and almost lost their lives. This kind of selfless and fearless spirit was worth learning by everyone. Master Qin and Master Li were named as the stars of Jianghu because of this. They were one of the top 10 figures in Jianghu. The leader of the caravan rewarded them with a lot of gold for saving their lives. The magistrate of Anxi County, Lord Lu, personally came to visit. Positive news like this could be publicized more. Of course, this was a very complicated and tedious job. Old Sun and the others were still in the exploration stage. Li Yi gave them sufficient funds. Seeing how important this matter was to Li Yi, Old Sun had already assigned many people to take care of this matter. Old Sun had a very big dream. He wanted to revitalize this industry so that more and more actors and actresses could eat their fill. This dream could not be realized by himself. Li Yi had now become his hope to realize this dream. One day their brothels would be built in other prefectures or even the capital, or even the entire Jing kingdom. Every time he thought about this, Old Sun's old face would glow. The ranking of the chivalrous leaderboard was updated very quickly. Yesterday, Chuzhou's Zhao Yuanwei, who was ranked 40th, had 3 of his ribs broken by Qingzhou's Pound, who was ranked 41st. The next day their rankings were switched. Those who were ranked at the bottom of the chivalrous leaderboard or those who were not on the leaderboard seemed to have found a breakthrough. They all expressed their desire to challenge Zhao Yuanwei. In view of his injuries, in the spirit of humanitarianism, everyone was willing to give him half a month to recuperate. It was said that in order to decide who would be the first to challenge, a few heroes fought. The scene was very intense. Some of them were even more seriously injured than Zhao Yuanwei. After that, the Zhao family's old house in Chuzhou became empty. More than half of the Zhao family's property was sold. Only a small portion was left for the old servants to take care of. As for Zhao Yuanwei, who was ranked 41st on the heavenly leaderboard, no one knew where he went. Wu Er was the one who told Li Yi these things. Wu Er had now become Old Sun's martial arts consultant. He received a monthly salary of 500 copper coins. All he needed to do was to ask his friends in the martial arts community to pay attention to the big and small matters in the martial arts community. The more valuable the information he provided, the more rewards he would receive. After Old Sun's team organized the information and told it to the people in the martial arts community, they received a large sum of money. A small portion of the money was used to put up rewards. It seemed that he had underestimated Old Sunday. With his efforts, this great cause was becoming more and more prosperous. Almost all the poor actors in Anxi County had been integrated by him. Spacious brothels were also spreading to further places. Due to the declining business of ruidu and hard liquor, the family's income, which had been decreasing every day, increased again. Even Li Yi had to admit that he had underestimated the huge potential of the brothels. After lying in the courtyard for a short while, Xiao Huan had already come to complain twice. The target of her complaint was, of course, the girl named Yang Liuqing, who was still begging Rui to take her as a disciple. The girl was young, but she was very persistent. Since Rui did not agree, she would come every day before dawn to clean the courtyard, boil water and chop firewood. After she was done with these chores, she would take a rag and wipe every place in the house until it was spotless. Most of these chores were done by Xiao Huan, but they were all snatched away by her. The servant girl had never been so free in her life. He had told her several times not to come anymore, but she never listened. She did not say a word and only knew how to work hard. Even Li Yi was a little touched by her. Young master, say something about her. She does all the chores and Xiao Huan has nothing to do. The servant girl looked at the girl who started to clean the courtyard with a broom in dissatisfaction and said while hugging Li Yi's arm, "Isn't it good to have nothing to do?" Li Yi knocked her head lightly and said, "Go play with Sister Su and the others. Let her do these chores if she wants to." Before Xiao Huan left, Li Xian walked in from outside and pointed at the unfamiliar girl in the courtyard suspiciously. He looked at Li Yi and asked, "Who is she? Is she your new concubine?" Clang. With the sound of a long sword being unsheathed, a sword light slashed over. Chapter 277. Retribution for having a foul mouth always came very fast. The girl named Yang Liuqing had the temperament of a Jianghu person. If there was a disagreement, she would raise her sword. There was a reason why she chose Lu Rui as her master. Of course she wouldn't kill him. The sword was more of a threat. Li Xian's guards didn't care whether she was threatening or really wanted to harm the crown prince. Anyone who dared to use weapons against the crown prince would be treated as an assassin. The two guards shouted. A flash of sword light flashed and collided with Yang Liuqing's sword. There was a sound of metal colliding. The girl couldn't help but take a few steps back. Li Xian's guards were all experts who were picked out of 100 or 1,000. Their strength was obviously better than Yang Liuqing's. Li Yi didn't have a clear understanding of the girl's strength. He only saw her fight with Rui. She was captured alive before she could even make one move. However, this didn't mean that she was weak. Mississippi Lu couldn't be used as a reference. Li Yi was very sure that even Li Xian's guards couldn't last one move against her. After forcing the girl to retreat, the two guards obviously didn't want to let her go. They took the opportunity to press on as if they wanted to capture her alive. There was a sound of weapons clashing in the courtyard. Yang Liuqing had a hard time dealing with one of them. Now that there were two of them, she could only retreat. Soon she was about to retreat into the house. Li Yi was just about to tell Li Xian to let his guards know when to stop. He couldn't blame anyone else for the sins of his mouth. Before he could say anything, the two guards' swords were broken into two. One of them had a sword on his neck. The other was shocked. When he was about to explode, the girl glanced at him coldly. It was like a bucket of cold water was poured on his head. He stood there and didn't dare to move. If you want to fight, go outside. Don't dirty the courtyard. Lu Rui said coldly and entered the house. The two guards didn't even have time to wipe the cold sweat off their foreheads. They picked up the broken weapons on the ground and immediately retreated. They didn't dare to cause trouble for the girl anymore. Just now he didn't manage to see it clearly. He only felt a flash of light before the saber in his hand broke. Then a saber was placed on his neck. He had always known that this woman was not simple, but today he deeply understood how terrifying she was. If she was on the Wulian hero ranking, she would at least be in the top 5. Yang Liuqing watched as the two people who had forced him to the point where he couldn't even fight back fled like stray dogs with their tails between their legs in the blink of an eye. The determination in his eyes deepened as he watched the figure walk into the house. The two guards were chased outside by Li Xian. They lay down on Li Yi's rocking chair comfortably. The chair under them swayed with the rhythm. They couldn't help but sigh. It is said that the royal family is extravagant. In fact, the one who knows the most about extravagant enjoyment is you. Li Yi curled his lips. What kind of world was this? Sleeping in a rocking chair was extravagant. She occupied his seat and said he was extravagant. A random rosewood chair from the prince's mansion could buy dozens or hundreds of his rocking chairs. You are about to get married. Why are you running around all day? If you like it, I will give you this chair. 100 taels of silver as usual. Yang Liuqing stared at Li Xian with an unfriendly gaze. The remaining guard behind Li Xian kept staring at her. After lying down for a long time, Li Yi stretched his waist and said lazily, I don't have your leisure. Surprisingly, Li Xian refused, something he rarely did. He stood up from his chair and looked at Li Yi, saying, I've been racking my brains for the past few days in the king's residence, working through the night until dawn. Finally, I've created something that can allow people to fly. What? Now it was Li Yi's turn to be shocked. It had only been a few days and this guy had made an airplane? It was impossible. It was impossible for him to understand Bernoulli's principle, and it was impossible for him to know anything about aerodynamics. Unless he was God, no one could build a plane by throwing stones and leaves from the roof, let alone in this age of ignorance. Even the most primitive and simple airplane was impossible. The Wright brothers invented the first real airplane, which only appeared at the beginning of the 20th century. Compared with most of the ancient people, Li Xian was very smart, but it was impossible for him to make something that was 1,000 years ahead of time. Soon, Li Yi saw Li Xian's airplane. It turned out that the thing that could let people fly was a huge kite made of cloth. A guard of the prince's mansion ran a few times, grabbed the kite and jumped down from the roof of the 2-story attic. After gliding in the air for more than 10 meters, he landed steadily on the ground. Li Yi blushed because he almost believed Li Xian's words. This was the thing that he made after thinking hard and staying up all night? It was just a big kite. Even if a pig was tied to it, as long as the angle was good, it would be able to glide in the air for a certain distance. The guards would be fine even if they directly jumped down from the 2-story building. They were used to going up and down, so this height was nothing to them. I think that if they jumped off the cliff, they might be able to fly even further. In the past, you said that people could fly in the sky with the help of external forces. I didn't really believe it, but now I believe it. Li Xian's expression was somewhat proud, as if he had done something very great. Hearing his words, the face of the guard who fell down from the roof turned pale. If they jumped down from the 2-story attic, they would only sprain their ankles at most. If they jumped down from the cliff, they might lose their lives. Li Yi was a bit dispirited. He had completely lost interest in Li Xian's big kite. Even if Li Xian made a glider, he might be a bit happy, but it was better than this thing without any technical content. You'd better not let them jump down from the cliff. Your guards are good at fighting skills. If one of them dies, there will be one less guard. It's not worthwhile. Don't tinker with the kite anymore. When you're free, you should study the sky praying lantern. It's much more useful than making another big kite. Li Xian's guard looked at Li Yi as if he was looking at a savior. When His Royal Highness asked him to jump down from the cliff with the kite, he had even written his will. He tried to steal a native dog from the neighboring village and tie it to the kite. As a result, the moment he let go of the kite fell down. That dog was really miserable. If it was him, he might not be any better than that animal. However, dog meat was really delicious. He swore that it was the most delicious meat he had ever eaten in his life. Even His Royal Highness the Crown Prince was full of praises for it. Since then, the number of dogs in the prefectural city had been especially serious. Sky praying lantern? Li Xian's attention was diverted. He rubbed his chin and started to think about what Li Yi meant. The image of the sky praying lantern rising into the sky appeared in his mind. Li Xian was stunned and his eyes suddenly lit up. While he was immersed in his own world, Li Yi planned to go home for dinner. A while ago, Li Xian was still having a headache about his marriage. These few days he was in the mood to hide at home and make plans. It seemed like he had completely accepted his fate. An arranged marriage was not acceptable. From the looks of it, he seemed to be planning to dedicate his life to science. After a short moment of silence for his future wife, he could see his own house. A figure was pacing back and forth at the entrance of the house. He kept rubbing his hands and looked very anxious. Li Yi walked over and asked, "Old son, what's wrong? Did something happen at the theater?" "Young master, you're finally back." Old son let out a long sigh of relief. Li Yi was his backbone. He only felt confident when he saw him. "It's not just the theater. Our brothel outside is also in trouble." Chapter 278. I heard that there is a new play in the brothel outside the city. It's called A Chinese Ghost Story. It's better than The Painted Skin. Do you want to watch it together? I've seen it a long time ago. The theater in the city opened 2 days ago. It's a little slower outside the city. This time I came to listen to old Zhao talk about Wulin. At the entrance of a tile-roofed house outside the city, 2 men greeted each other with a smile and walked in side by side. "I want to watch A Chinese Ghost Story, but I'm afraid I can't today. I just came from there. The brothel is closed today. I'll come back early tomorrow." A person who came out of the house reminded them. "It's closed? What's wrong with those people? They don't want to earn money." People who liked to watch plays and listen to songs inside and outside the prefectural city were surprised to find that the recently built brothels were all closed today. Those who wanted to watch new plays and listen to Wulin's stories suddenly had nowhere to go. They could only go back home after cursing for a while. In the city, the well-received Chongping Street Theater also hung up a sign that it was closed today, making countless people leave in disappointment. At this time in the theater, a few managers of the brothels outside the city gathered there, frowning. "Miss Wan, we can't just close like this. These days, A Chinese Ghost Story is very popular. If we don't open for a day, we will lose 5 strings of coins." A gray-haired old man said with a sad face. As soon as the old man finished speaking, everyone's eyes were on the only woman present. On the surface, it was old Sun who was in charge, but they all knew that Miss Wan was actually the one who had the most say when it came to big things. Before Wan Ruoqing could say anything, another old man slammed the table. His beard trembled as he said, "These despicable stars. It's not easy for the children to have enough to eat, and now they're plotting against us. We can't hand over the script. It's more important than our lives. They want to buy it just because they have money. This is robbery. Anyway, I don't have many years to live. Even if I have to risk my old life, I will splash their blood." Wan Ruoqing hurriedly said, "Don't worry, Mr. Qian. No one wants to hand over the script. No one wants to give it to them. Mr. Sun is going to solve this problem. He will not let those people succeed." Wan Ruoqing said, "It's difficult." The old man who spoke first sighed and said, "We have no power or influence. What can we use to fight against them? Those children are still lying inside." As soon as the old man finished speaking, everyone saw old man's son accompanying a young man walking over from the back door. "How's the injured?" The young man walked over and asked directly. Everyone looked at the young man with a hint of doubt in their eyes. After looking at old Sun, they seemed to understand something and their expressions changed. Wan Ruoqing came over and said, "We've already sent for a doctor. They only suffered superficial wounds. It's not a big deal." One of them broke 2 ribs and may need some time to recover. Li asked again, "Who did it? Did you find out?" "They are all famous ruffians in the city. They said that since we are in their territory and under their protection, we should give them money as compensation. We didn't want to provoke them and wanted to send them away with some copper coins. We didn't expect them to ask for 10 coins as soon as they opened their mouth. They also said that they would come to ask for it once a day. Dongzi and the others only argued with them for a while before they were injured." This time it was the gray-haired old man who spoke. His tone was very respectful. Seeing Old Man's son and Miss Wan's attitude toward this young man, he knew that this young man was the benefactor who gave them a living. So he told them the whole story in full detail. "Why didn't you report it to the authorities?" Li looked at him and asked. Qing and Prefecture and even Anxi County had been divided into small districts by him. Each district had a special person in charge who was responsible for fighting and bullying the good. When he was working under County Magistrate Zhou, he didn't care what the bailiffs and bailiffs did. In order to fulfill the agreement with Her Royal Highness before he left the Yamen, he restrained those guys a lot. If there was any dereliction of duty or bullying the common people, he didn't have to do anything himself. Lu Yishui would make them pay for it. The old man shook his head and said, "We can't report it to the authorities. Those ruffians often enter the Yamen. If they are caught and locked up for a few days at most, when they come out we will be the unlucky ones. Moreover, this time they were ordered by someone to make us hand over the script. We are all doing this for a living. Those people are so cruel." Everyone, including Old Man's son, had worried expressions on their faces. The authorities wouldn't care about the life and death of these lowly actors. With the power of those people, if they really reported it to the authorities, they would be even more unlucky. They finally had something to look forward to. Were they going to walk into the abyss again? Old Son's old face showed strong unwillingness. He seemed to have aged a few more years. Other than Li Yi, the one who was least worried was Ruoqing. Because only she knew that the person behind them wasn't just a weak scholar. In Ning Wangfu, he had reprimanded the new Jinsher in front of so many officials. He had offended many people, but he was fine. On the other hand, Cui Yanxin and Jiangzi and hadn't been appointed by the imperial court. Their careers hadn't even started, but they had already reached the end. Old Sun and Old Qian were worried that after reporting it to the authorities, those ruffians would take revenge. Little did they know that the person those ruffians and idlers should be most afraid of was him. "Go back. Everything will return to normal. Do what you need to do. I will take care of these things." After Li Yi spoke, everyone looked troubled. Before the matter was resolved, those people wouldn't give up. As soon as they opened the door to perform, those ruffians would definitely follow. Before they could ask what they were worried about, a group of people suddenly rushed in from behind. The man in the lead cracked his knuckles and asked excitedly, "Young master, who are we looking for trouble this time?" In the morning, the doors of the theater and the brothel were still tightly closed. In the afternoon, they opened their doors to welcome the guests. There were still a few days before the new year. The New Year's goods had been bought. More and more people had nothing to do at home. People were idle all the time, they would get sick. Therefore, many people would find something to do in these days. The brothel was a good place to go, especially the newly built ones. They attracted the attention of many people. They were already tired of those old things. Only something fresh like a Chinese ghost story could please them. Although there were 2 men who looked extraordinary in the theater, Old Man's son didn't feel relieved at all. He glanced at the young man who was chatting with Miss Wan and could only sigh. So what if he could chase those ruffians away? He could chase them away once or twice. Could he chase them away countless times? They would always make a comeback. What should he do when that time came? Moreover, those ruffians who were looking for trouble weren't the main point. Those who were interested in the script were the ones who should have a headache. Old Man's son patted his swollen head and an arrogant laugh was heard. "Old man, business is good. Have you raised enough money? I always keep my word. If you can take out 10 strings of money, I will leave immediately and come back tomorrow." Chapter 279. Accompanied by a burst of laughter, a few figures filed in from outside the door. The leader was a large man with a knife scar on his face. He wore a thin shirt in the middle of winter, exposing a large portion of his chest. The black hair covering his heart was almost growing to his neck. The other people also looked quite fierce. They were all ruffians and bullies on this street. There weren't many people who didn't know them. Although they had quieted down a bit because of the government, the fear that had accumulated in their hearts for a long time could not be dispelled in a short period of time. Because they had been disturbed from watching the play, a few spectators wanted to stand up and throw out the people who didn't open their eyes. But when they saw the situation at the door, they immediately sat back down and focused on watching the play, no longer daring to care about what was happening over there. If they provoked those ruffians, they wouldn't be able to live in peace in the future. This is Qing, an prefectural city. We have to abide by the law. We don't have 10 strings of coins. If you continue to be so aggressive, don't blame us for reporting it to the government. Old Sun looked at the two men walking over from the corner and felt a bit more at ease. He looked directly at the knife-scarred man and said this. "Oh, brothers, did I hear wrong?" The knife-scarred man heard this and was stunned for a moment. Then he laughed loudly and said, "Old man, you dare to talk about the law with us? On this street I am the law." The ruffians behind him roared with laughter. The nobleman who gave them this task originally had connections with the government. Why would he be afraid of things like the law? They had already arranged everything. Even if they were arrested and sent to the county government, they would have a way to get out. The knife-scarred man pulled out a stool and blocked the door. He crossed his legs and looked at Old Sunday. He said, "It seems that you don't care about what I said. I will say it here today. 10 strings of coins, not a copper coin less. Otherwise I will smash your broken theater." "Smash the theater? Is this how you smash it?" A voice suddenly came from the side. Before the knife-scarred man could react, a long stool flew from the side and hit him squarely in the face. A few bloody teeth flew out of his mouth. The knife-scarred man was sent flying. His face was covered in blood and he lay on the ground motionless. "Oh, it's an acquaintance." Fong clapped his hands and walked over. When he saw the knife-scarred man lying on the ground, he was also stunned. Although his face was covered in blood, that iconic scar indicated his identity. A few months ago, wasn't this the guy who wanted 2 of the son-in-law's money and was caught and beaten up by them? Kill. Seeing their boss fall to the ground after the stool, of blood was seen. Every year during the Qingming festival they would clear the weeds on his grave. They were hoodlums, not fugitives. They could extort a few copper coins in exchange for wine money, tease innocent women on the streets and take advantage of them. But when it came to murder and arson, they would never do it even if they were beaten to death. This was a matter of principle. He once had a few hoodlum brothers who had no principles. They did not behave like hoodlums and accidentally killed someone. Now the grass on his grave was 3 feet high. Every year during the Qingming festival, they would loosen the soil and weed out the grass on his grave. This. Old Man Sun's face turned green, and his lips were trembling. Teaching these thugs a lesson was not a big deal. How did it lead to the death of a person? This. Old Man Sun's face turned green, and his lips were trembling. Teaching these thugs a lesson was nothing. How did it lead to the death of a person? The death of a person was a big matter, and the audience in the theater were also in a panic. One after another they stood up from their seats. "Don't worry, he won't die." Fong patted Old Man Sun's shoulder and said indifferently. He knew very well what he did. At most this guy's nose bridge was broken and a few teeth were lost. It was not that serious. "Big brother, you died so miserably." A young man knelt on the ground with a plop, and before his tears could fall, he received a heavy kick in the chest. "This daddy is not dead yet." The knife-scarred man crawled up from the ground. In this life he may not have experienced big wind and waves, but small wind and waves had never stopped. The scar on his face was left from when he fought with others. A mere stool was not enough to take his life. "What are you still doing? Beat him up, beat him hard. Today this daddy will break his 2 legs. Blood flowed down from his forehead and his eyes were blurred. He didn't recognize any acquaintances. He just wanted to break the legs of the guy who had just ambushed him, and the matter of the 10 coins was temporarily thrown to the back of his mind. Seeing that his big brother was not dead, the young man who was kicked immediately got up from the ground, rubbed his chest and said loudly, "Didn't you hear what big brother said? Break their dog legs." As soon as the word dog legs came out, half of his teeth were gone. Fong slapped the young man's mouth and he flew out with his teeth. Just like the knife-scarred man just now, he lay on the ground without moving. The knife-scarred man wiped the blood from his eyes, and finally saw the man standing in front of him. The fierce expression on his face disappeared, and his whole body could not help but tremble. He would never forget that vicious beating for the rest of his life. Every night he would dream about that face and still have some lingering fear. Those people were all monsters, even more barbaric than wild beasts. If it was possible, he would never want to meet them in his life. Unfortunately, the heavens did not give them good luck. In the moment he was stunned, the brothers he brought all fell to the ground and could not get up. This was such a familiar scene. The brothers with the best skills did not have the strength to fight back against these two monsters. They blocked a punch, and the next moment they were kicked to the ground. If there were constables coming at this time, this nightmare would be as complete as the last time. As if they heard the call in his heart, a few figures wearing black clothes quickly appeared in front of him. Just as he was about to cry and complain, he saw the leader of the constables walk over and greet the man with a smile. He didn't hear what they said, but soon his brothers were chained up. After seeing the appearance of the leading constables, the knife-scarred man's two legs began to not listen to him. "It's better to offend the county magistrate than the king of hell." This was a sentence that everyone in the circle knew. The county magistrate naturally referred to County Magistrate Lu, and the king of hell they mentioned was also surnamed Lu. Although his name was Lu Yi, the chief constable of Anxi County government, he never showed mercy when dealing with criminals. It was said that during this period of time, the screams in the county government prison could be heard outside the county government. If they fell into his hands, it was really no different from going to hell. "You arrested the wrong person, you arrested the wrong person. You can't do this, it's him who beat people, it's him. You can't arrest me, I know Magistrate Wang, I know Magistrate Wang." When the knife-scarred man was dragged away by the constables, he cried with snot and tears. Seeing King of Hell, Lu turned around and smiled at him. He immediately rolled his eyes and fainted. The troublemakers were all taken away by the constables and no one was killed, so the onlookers were relieved and went on with their business. The constables of the county government were obviously more dedicated than before, and they wouldn't help those ruffians to bully good people, which was a good thing. Those bastards who only knew how to bully people should be chained and locked up in the prison, never to be let out again. Seeing those ruffians being dragged away by the constables, Oldman's son was a little dumbfounded. Are they still the constables of the county government? They didn't ask the reason at all but chained them and left. It seems that those ruffians will suffer a lot. When did the constables of the county government start to do good things? Oldman's son soon knew the reason. "Your Honor." Lu Yi walked to Li Yi and saluted respectfully. Li Yi patted him on the shoulder and said approvingly, "Not bad. I heard that you've solved several major cases during this period of time, and the security of the prefecture city has been maintained very well. Everyone knows that there's a Hell King Lu in the county government." Lu Yi blushed and said, "It's all because of your good teaching." In front of Li Yi, he was even more humble than in front of County Magistrate Lu, and he admired Li Yi from the bottom of his heart. Lu Yi was very clear that he could have today's status because of the county magistrate's important position, which made him become the chief of constables in charge of all the bailiffs in a short period of time, from a constables who just ate and waited for death in the county government. Even when the county magistrate was not in the county government, what he did was what a county magistrate should do. Even the constables of the county government would sometimes ask him to go over when they encountered difficult cases. The county magistrate's kindness of enlightening him and the appreciation of him, there was nothing he could do except to earnestly perform the task assigned by the county magistrate. Listening to the conversation between the constables and Li, Oldman's son found a stool and sat down, his legs and stomach trembling. County magistrate. It turned out that Li was the county magistrate. No wonder Miss Wan didn't worry about those ruffians from the beginning. It turned out that she had known about it. Oldman's son didn't complain about Wan watching. The less they knew about the affairs of the big shots, the better. At this time he didn't worry at all in his heart. From now on they also had a backer behind them. Presumably those guys who went to the brothels outside the city to look for trouble were all chained up with iron chains like dogs, right? Are your dog eyes blind to bully the county magistrate? If they don't lose a layer of skin this time, I will write the word son upside down. And those greedy guys who stretched their hands too far would be chopped off. No way, did you really give them 10 strings of coins? When Oldman's son cursed in his heart, a surprised voice came from the door. He turned his head and saw a man in luxurious clothes coming in. The man looked around the theater a few times, clicked his tongue and said, "I really didn't expect that such a shabby place could actually collect so much money. Leader Wu, this thing was done by you, right?" Old Man Sun's anger was aroused again and he looked at the man and said, "What thing?" The man in luxurious clothes sat opposite to Old Man Sun and said with a smile, "I just heard that Old Sun's theater earns a lot of money every day, and those ruffians deserve more protection and money. I just didn't expect that. I still underestimated Old Sun's ability. A straightforward person doesn't resort to insinuations. It's boring to be a coward." Old Man Sun poured a cup of tea for himself, glanced at the man in luxurious clothes, and drank the tea in one gulp. He was no stranger to the man in luxurious clothes opposite him. The man was also an actor, but he was different from them. Wandering actors like them, in order to make a living, drifted around like duckweed without roots, and their lives were the most miserable. There were also actors in the palace, and there were also private actors in the homes of the high officials and nobles. Although these people didn't have much freedom, their lives were much better than theirs. As for those powerful troops, although most of them performed for the high officials and nobles, they never lacked freedom, and the money they earned was also incomparable to theirs. The man with the surname Wu was the leader of a famous troop in the prefectural city. Seeing that Old Man Sun's face was indifferent and directly pointed out the topic, a trace of annoyance appeared on the man's face, but he quickly returned to normal and said, "Since that's the case, I won't beat around the bush. 10 strings of coins, how many books like Painted Skin and A Chinese Ghost Story do you have? We want all of them." Old Man Sun's expression didn't change, but he was sneering in his heart. These books were all written by the county lieutenant and he was sitting there now. If the man with the surname Wu had the ability, he could go and find him himself. Wanting to buy food for everyone with 10 strings of coins was simply a dream. Even if he agreed, the county lieutenant wouldn't agree. The man in luxurious clothes looked at the almost empty theater, and a trace of passion appeared in his eyes. Even such a run-down place had so many people. If it was his troupe, the scene would be even more lively. It was a waste to leave such excellent books here. He had already done his research. These new plays did not exist in the market at all. Although they would be able to imitate most of them in a few days, they would still lose the initiative. When the time comes, everyone would have seen the original play. Who would still watch them? Give up. Don't mention 10 strings of coins, even if it's 100 strings of coins, we won't sell it. With the backing of a big shot, Old Man Sun was full of confidence. The man in luxurious clothes narrowed his eyes and said, "So, you plan to take out 10 strings of coins every day. Maybe it will become 20 tomorrow. So it was you who played tricks behind the scenes." Old Man Sun sneered and said, "Don't worry, they won't come again. A few officials came and took them all away. So what if I did it? Even if I didn't do it, someone else would. You don't think the government will really care about these things, do you?" The man in luxurious clothes looked at him mockingly and said, "You refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. I hope you can still stand here when you see them tomorrow." After the man in luxurious clothes finished speaking, he suddenly felt a chill on his neck. An iron chain was hung on his neck. The constable locked the chain and said lightly, "Since it was done by you, it's easy. Come with me." Lu Yi's words were cold, without a trace of emotion. Chapter 280. There were only 3 days left until the end of the year. The closer it was to the new year, the easier it was for something to happen. The commoners in the prefectural city had already seen several groups of people with iron chains around their necks. They were all arrested and about to be dragged away. They were all familiar faces. Many people clapped their hands in glee when they saw hoodlums who did not do their jobs all day long being locked up in jail. This time the other hoodlums in the city immediately calmed down. They obediently stayed at home and did not dare to wander around. Dao Ba and the others were all taken away. It was said that it was an order from King of Hell Lu. Dao Ba would be severely punished even if he did not die this time. It was better for them to behave themselves. Who knew if the iron chains would suddenly wrap around their necks? A theatrical troupe in the city suddenly closed its doors. The other troupes followed suit one after another. Only the theaters in the city and the brothels outside the city were still bustling with business. There was an endless stream of spectators. One group after another came and went. Everyone, including Old Sun, felt reassured when they saw the hoodlums who caused trouble being taken away by the officials. Now, even if they were to open brothels all over Anxi County, they would not encounter any obstacles. Who would have thought that the young man standing behind them was the county magistrate? Which hoodlum would dare to be reckless? Li Yi only asked the constables in charge of this street to pay more attention to this place. From today onwards, Old Sun and the others would most likely not encounter any obstacles. Perhaps it was because it was the new year, they did not see the young girl who had become their disciple these few days. Recently it was a busy time for the women and children. They cleaned up the dust, said goodbye to the old and welcomed the new, and used flour to make all kinds of shapes. On the 30th day of the new year, the residence was already decorated with lanterns and colored banners. Regardless of ancient times or modern times, the New Year was the most important festival of the year. On the night of the New Year, the family could gather together for a reunion dinner. This meant that the family would still have a surplus at the end of the year. It was the happiest and most satisfying thing. Today was a special day. The streets in the city were not very lively. The shops were only open for half a day. When the sky turned dark, everyone returned home to prepare a sumptuous New Year's Eve dinner. After closing the door of the residence, the inside became a world of its own. For the naughty children, today was the happiest day of their lives. As long as they didn't cause too much trouble, their parents chose to turn a blind eye. After nightfall, a bonfire was lit in the outer residence. The naughty children kept throwing bamboo into the fire, listening to the crackling sounds of the bamboo. They competed to see who threw the bamboo into the fire with the loudest sound. This was the most traditional firecrackers. As for the nice-looking fireworks, they were too expensive. His parents could not bear to buy them. They could only watch as white light shot out from other courtyards explode in the sky. Every sound would cause the naughty children to scream. Li Yi didn't have time to watch the fireworks. He was tired of all kinds of large-scale fireworks displays in his previous life. The scene here was too small and it didn't arouse his interest at all. In order to prepare a sumptuous New Year's Eve dinner, the whole family was busy in the kitchen. For the remaining dozen or so families in the mansion, this might be the most extravagant New Year's Eve of their lives. Even for the poorest family, there wouldn't be a single chicken, duck, or fish missing. The family didn't lack money. It was fine to be frugal during normal times, but now wasn't the time to be frugal. Li Yi moved a small stool and sat in the corner to prepare the fresh fish that he bought this morning. How could such a grand occasion miss out on sweet and sour fish? Xiao Huan added firewood to the stove. Rui blanched the cut meat in the water before scooping it out and placing it on a plate for later use. Beside the table, Rui's knife danced in the air, and the tofu was cut into triangular shapes with uniform size and thickness. This was the only work she could do in the kitchen. Tonight, apart from Miss Lu, everyone would be able to cook 2 dishes. Xiao Huan had already been trained by Li Yi. In this world, she had already become an existence of the level of a chef. Needless to say, Rui's cooking skills couldn't even be compared to Li Yi's. In just a short while, the table was filled with dishes. In the past, it was Xiao Huan or Rui who cooked. Li Yi and Rui only needed to move their mouths. Perhaps it was because the 3 people in the family were cooking and she was the only one standing at the side waiting for dinner. Mississippi Lu insisted on showing off her cooking skills. In the end, there was a plate of black substance in the middle of the table of delicious dishes. Li Yi found it hard to imagine that the black substance was Lu Rui's fried chicken chops. She had clearly covered the chicken in flour and fried it in oil before scooping it out. Such a simple procedure had resulted in such a product when it came to Lu Rui. Li Yi picked up the chopsticks and praised Rui's soup. The heat was just right. Xiao Huan's cooking skills had improved again, but she was unwilling to touch the charred substance. Try the dishes I cooked. Mississippi Lu picked up a piece of chicken chops and put it in Xiao Huan's bowl. Her eyes were fixed on him. Xiao Huan's pretty face turned pale. The thing she worried about the most had happened. She ran away quickly with the excuse of stomachache. Seeing that Rui's eyes were already looking at him, Li Yi's expression changed. Before he could react, there was an extra piece of black substance in his bowl. Mississippi Lu obviously didn't intend to let him go. It was her first time to cook. If he disgraced her this time, she might take revenge on him next time. Weighing the pros and cons, he felt that it was nothing to eat a little charred food. Eating charred food could make him rich. This was the principle his grandma told him when he was a child. Although it had never worked, maybe it would work here. A good fried chicken chops tasted like charred food. Li Yi had a new evaluation of Mississippi Lu's cooking skills. Such a girl could only be married in the future. In this world, a girl who couldn't cook would be driven out by her family the next day. How is it? Lu Rui looked at him and asked. Not bad. Li Yi picked up another piece and put it in her bowl. He said, you try it. After tasting her masterpiece, Mississippi Lu went to rinse her mouth with a gloomy face. After Xiao Huan came back, she quickly put the charcoal back when she was not there. She patted her little chest and looked like she still had a lingering fear. After rinsing her mouth, Mississippi Lu threw those things into the dustbin and didn't mention anything about cooking. After dinner there were more activities. Xiao Huan and a few close friends were carrying out some secret activities. Li Yi lit the fireworks, which caused the naughty children to scream around him. There were explosions in the sky from time to time. Since he could remember, it was the first New Year's Eve without the Spring Festival Gala. Passed just like that. When the bell rang in the distant night, history turned to a new page. Time officially entered the second year of Jinghe. Li Yi carried the little servant girl who was sleeping on the night of the New Year and gently placed her on the Kong. After covering her with the quilt, he quietly left. The fireworks in the distance were still brilliant. There was no ban on setting off fireworks and firecrackers here, and there was no need to worry about the haze. Li Yi stood under the porch and looked at the night sky in the distance. He didn't look away for a long time. The last time he saw something like this, it wasn't this sky. A long robe was draped over his body. Li Yi retracted his gaze. When he turned around, he embraced the woman in front of him. Under her slightly startled gaze, he held her hand and led her into the room. Chapter 281. When he was washing up in the morning, Li Yi found some blood under his nose. Recently he was indeed a little angry. After a few nights of improving their relationship, he could even sleep in the same bed with Rui at night. However, every time he was about to reach the last step, she would sleep in another bed. This was a sin. Li Yi even suspected that she was deliberately teasing him, but he could only sigh in his heart. When would these days come to an end? During the spring festival in the previous years, he had to visit his relatives and friends from the second day of the new year. He had to give money to the younger generation until his hands were tired. This year he didn't have to go through this process. He came here alone. Although he was from the Li family village, he didn't remember the past. It was not an exaggeration to say that he was unfamiliar with the place and didn't have any sense of belonging there. Rui also didn't have any relatives here, so he spent the spring festival very leisurely. From the third day of the new year, the girl named Yang Liuqing would appear at home on time. She was diligent and would appear wherever there was work. She would come early in the morning and only go back at night. She had completely put on the identity of a servant. It seemed that she wanted to use this method to impress Rui. Sometimes when Rui was practicing, she would stare at him without blinking. Rui also didn't chase him away, which made Li Yi feel a little strange. He didn't know what she was thinking, but he didn't intend to care. Whether she accepted a disciple or not was her business. These days he had his own things to do. This half a month was the busiest period of time in Qing, and prefectural city. All officials, big and small, could not take a break. As the county magistrate, maintaining the security of the city was his main responsibility. The frequency of patrols on the streets had obviously increased. Every day they would deal with a few small cases. Fortunately, there were no major murders. With Lu Yi around, his subordinates could handle everything. When there was nothing to do, Li Yi would drink tea and read books in the county government office. It was extremely worry-free for the county lieutenant to do this. Daniel had been walking back and forth in front of Li Yi for a while, which annoyed Li Yi. Since he could get out of bed after his wounds got better, he ran to the government office to report. In addition to going to the brothel, he was also honest. However, no matter how honest he was, Li Yi wouldn't allow him to keep walking in front of him. He put down the book, patted the table and said, "If you want to walk, go outside. Arrestor Lu needs people. If you have nothing to do, go and help him." Daniel finally stopped and said with a bitter expression, "Sir, Arrestor Lu and a few brothers have been trying to catch that thief for a few days already, but they haven't even seen his shadow." Every night there are big houses being robbed, so that thief is probably not easy to catch. Seeing that the teacup in front of Li Yi was empty, he hurriedly ran over and filled it for him. He said with a flattering face, "I'd better stay in the county government office. I can still help my lord pour a cup of tea." After spending so much time together, Daniel had already figured out the county lieutenant's temperament. Magistrate Li was not like the previous county lieutenant Zhou, who always had a stern face and often scolded them. The current county lieutenant was not only more capable than the one surnamed Zhou, but he was also very approachable. Even if he saw them slacking off, he would at most give them a kick in the butt. Last time, Milord Li took the knockout drug from him and gave him a lot of money as compensation. He couldn't refuse it. He was not like Zhou Pixiu, who only gave money to his brothers but never gave it out. That bastard deserved to be put in jail. As soon as Daniel filled up Li Yi's teacup, there was a commotion at the door. Several constables walked in dejectedly. Seeing their bruised and swollen faces, Li Yi stood up and asked curiously, "What happened to you guys? How did you end up like this?" Although constables didn't even have a rank in the county government office, for ordinary people, they were considered half an official. Beating up a constable was a much more serious crime than assaulting a police officer in the future. Not only could they enjoy a free tour of the county prison for a few days, but they could also be given a free beating. It was really worth it. "My lord, that female cat burglar was really powerful. We had already caught her by following the clues, but who knew that she was so good at kung fu? She accidentally escaped," one of the constables said gloomily. Not only did they fail to catch a thief, they were beaten up by a thief. Moreover, it was a female thief. It made them feel a little embarrassed. "Where's Lu Yi?" Li Yi asked. "Constable Lu asked us to come back and call a few more brothers." He had already confirmed the female thief's residence. The constable clenched his fist and said with hatred. Listening to his description, the female cat burglar should be skilled in kung fu. He was afraid that they, who were just dabblers, would not be able to deal with her. The possibility of them being beaten up was higher. His subordinates were beaten up. Li Yi also felt embarrassed. Today, Fang's wife brought Juzi back to her parents' home to see her mother-in-law. Fang was idle at home, so he brought him along to suppress the situation. This task obviously made Fang interested. He looked down on the constable's fighting power and strongly recommended Lu Yi to be the constable. If he became the constable, he guaranteed that the constables in the yamen would not be beaten up like this again. Lu Yi pretended that he didn't hear Fang's words. The position of the constable wasn't something that could be done with a fist. It needed to be done with a brain. He was too lazy to deal with those who only knew how to use brute force. He cupped his fists and said to Li Yi, "Although that female cat burglar comes and goes without a trace, there are always times when she is careless. I investigated a few pawnshops in the city and found that there were a few items that were being traded. They were the items that the rich families had lost. That female thief is also smart. She pawned at a different pawnshop every time. A few of my brothers waited for her for 2 days and finally found her. However, the thief's skills were very good, so we suffered a loss. However, this subordinate has already tracked down her residence." Lu Yi brought a few constables and led the way in front. Li Yi and Fang followed behind. With Fang around, Li Yi didn't plan to join in the fun. He just wanted to see what the female cat burglar looked like. Taking advantage of the dark and windy night, leaping onto roofs and vaulting over walls, robbing rich families, robbing the rich to give to the poor. This was the standard routine of chivalrous men in Wuxia novels. The person in front of them might be such a chivalrous woman. As for Li Yi himself in the novels, he was a villain who only knew how to plunder the people's wealth and went against chivalrous men. His ending was usually not very good. As the few of them walked and entered the northern area of the city, the houses were obviously low and dilapidated. Li Yi remembered that Daoist's family lived here. "Sir, it's here." Lu Yi pointed at a dilapidated courtyard in front of them and said softly. A brother in plain clothes followed her from afar and saw her enter this courtyard. Li Yi waved his hand and 2 constables kicked open the door. The constables immediately rushed in, unsheathed their weapons and looked at the courtyard vigilantly. After all, she had suffered a great loss at the hands of the female cat burglar. No one would look down on her just because she was a woman. In the courtyard, more than 10 children were gathered together, holding buns in their hands and chewing on them. Seeing so many constables coming in, A 7 or 8-year-old girl was shocked and accidentally dropped the bun on the ground. After being stunned for a moment, she immediately picked it up and hid it behind her clothes. "Hey, female thief, you are already surrounded by us. Hurry up and surrender." One of the constables looked at a girl who was about 16 or 17 years old and shouted loudly, "Sister, run." Seeing that the constables had barged in with knives, a boy's face changed and he shouted loudly. A few boys immediately ran out from the crowd. The oldest was about 11 or 12 years old and the youngest was only 7 or 8 years old. At that moment, they were all baring their teeth at Lu Yi and the others as if they were going to charge at them at any time. "Why is it her?" Fang's mouth was wide open. He looked at Li Yi with a face full of surprise. Seeing that the children had fierce expressions and were staring at Lu Yi and the others, Li Yi realized that he had actually guessed correctly. Chapter 282. On New Year's Eve, the entire prefectural city was in a state of jubilation. Everyone, including the rich families, let down their guard. Perhaps even the thieves wouldn't want to steal at this time. The heroine who robbed the rich to help the poor took this opportunity to climb over the high walls and steal the people's belongings. It wasn't for personal gain but to help these helpless children. When she pawned the belongings, she had to be careful not to be discovered by the dog official and his henchmen. If something happened to her, the children would have to beg outside. It was obvious that she had made a mistake in the end, and the dog official led a group of constables to chase her here. Li Yi felt that he was the dog official in the story. It couldn't be more appropriate. No wonder he hadn't seen Yang Liuqing for 2 days. So she had been doing these things for the past 2 days. "Put down your weapons." With no other choice, he could only wave his hand at Lu Yishui and the others. Li Yi didn't think that robbing the rich to help the poor was a bad thing. In fact, he had wanted to do it himself. Moreover, the clothes he changed out of this morning were taken to be washed by others. It wasn't good for his subordinates to point knives at her at this time. "Take out all the things you stole." Li Yi walked over and looked at her. Although what she had done was reasonable, it wasn't legal. She had to give those people something. "No, they will starve to death." The girl looked up at him with a hint of stubbornness in her eyes. She shook her head. Li Yi looked at the dozen or so children behind her. The girls were hiding behind the boys and the boys were protecting them. They were still staring at him and the others. Although their bodies were still slightly trembling, they were all clenching their fists. Li Yi believed that if Lu Yishui and the others made a move, they would rush up the next moment. Only this time. "Don't do it again." He glanced at Yang Liuqing and turned to walk out the door. "Sister, aren't the officials going to arrest you?" Seeing that the fierce officials had left, a girl around 7 or 8 years old walked out from behind and tugged at the corner of Yang Liuqing's clothes. Yang Liuqing touched her head and said, "Don't worry, the officials only hang up the bad guys. Sister is a good person, they won't arrest you." When the little girl heard this, a smile immediately appeared on her face. She took out a bun from the basket and handed it to her. She grinned and said, "Sister, have a bun." Yang Liuqing took the bun from her hand and took a small bite. When he looked up at the door, the figures had already disappeared. "What? Do you think I did something wrong and shouldn't have let her go?" Along the way, Li Yi noticed that Lu Yidong seemed like he wanted to say something several times but stopped. Lu Yi cupped his fists respectfully and said, "This subordinate can understand Milord's benevolence. However, this action is against the law. If word of this spreads, Milord will be in trouble." Li Yi smiled and said, "The law is dead but people are alive. If we capture that woman today, perhaps those children will starve to death. Reason and the law are sometimes in conflict. How to make a decision? As long as you're not letting your heart down, it's fine." Seeing the county lieutenant walk away, Lu Yidong stood in the same place and fell into deep thought. Reason and the law. He muttered these words and a trace of confusion appeared on his face. After a long time, his confusion gradually became clear. He sighed. The jewelry that those rich families had lost was stolen by a great thief who roamed the various prefectures. The probability of getting it back was really too slim. Yang Luqing swept the courtyard once again and sat on a stone bench in the corner. She looked at the young scholar who was holding a book in his hands. The strange chair he was sitting on was swaying back and forth. It seemed to be very comfortable. It wasn't until today that she found out that this seemingly weak scholar was actually an official. When she indirectly asked the young maidservant, the other party proudly told her that her son-in-law was a county magistrate and that he was in charge of a lot of officials. Apart from the first day they had come here, the two of them had not interacted much with each other. His impression of the young scholar was that he was lazy. As long as the sun was good outside, she would see him lying on that strange chair. Sometimes he would hold a book in his hand and sometimes he wouldn't. He seemed to practice martial arts as well. He would practice for at least 2 hours a day, but she didn't know which martial arts he learned. His fist technique was soft and didn't have any strength. Maybe he was just learning it for fun. No matter what, she couldn't associate him with an 8th-rank official. However, he had a good heart. If he didn't let her go today, those children would be begging on the streets. Although she didn't know those children for a long time, since she saved them from the hands of the human traffickers, she didn't want them to go back to their previous lives. That's right, that strange fist technique. Her future master would sometimes practice it and he never avoided her. She really couldn't understand why she was so good at martial arts when she was the same age as her. She must be her disciple. If she could learn her skills, she should be able to take revenge, right? Li put down the book and looked back. That girl was in a daze again. He didn't expect that she was the female cat burglar. He heard that a lot of rich families in the city had been robbed. At night, when he saw a woman in white flying around on the roofs, he would kneel down and beg, "Ghost, spare me." Those children were orphans. In this era there were no orphanages. If it wasn't for Yangliuking, they could only beg on the streets. The possibility of starving to death was very high, especially during the winter. This kind of thing was not uncommon. He couldn't let her keep robbing rich families. There would be a day when she would be exposed. If he could find some work for them so that they could support themselves, it would be considered a good deed. When the sky gradually darkened, another day had passed. Yangliuking came out of the big house. When he was thinking about the 2 moves that he learned today, he heard footsteps behind him. "Master." She turned her head. When she saw the young scholar, she hurriedly bowed. Li Yi waved his hand and said, "After buying a place for them to live, there's not much left. If we use it sparingly, it should last for a month. If they are willing, we can let a few older people work in the theater, such as assistants. You know the theater, right? Cleaning the tables and sweeping the floor, doing some light work. They should be able to support themselves. If they are willing, they can let a few of the older ones work in the theater as assistants. You know the theater, right? Cleaning the tables, sweeping the floor and doing some light work. They should be able to support themselves." Li Yi nodded. "Chongping Street Theater. Just say that it's my idea. They will help you arrange it." Li Yi nodded. "Chongping Street Theater. Just say that it's my idea. They will help you arrange it." Joy appeared on Yangliuking's face. When he was about to thank him, several figures came over. Li Yi planned to go home and hide for a while. He didn't know how far Li Xian's airplane research had progressed, and whether he had used the Kongming lantern to take the dog into the sky. Based on the current conditions, without the right materials, the hot air balloon thing couldn't be realized. Even if he asked him, it would be useless. "I'm leaving." Unexpectedly, Li Xian didn't come to ask him how to fly into the sky. Instead, he went straight to the point with a dispirited look on his face. Li Yi's expression changed slightly and he hurriedly said, "Isn't it just marrying a woman I've never seen? It's nothing. It's all the same even if she's covered with a blanket. Besides, you said that the woman is an outstanding beauty. No matter how you look at it, it won't be a loss. Don't take things too hard. It's not because of this matter." Li Yi's expression changed again. "Could it be that you have an incurable disease? This is a bit troublesome, but don't give up. You are the son of King Ning. What kind of famous doctor can't you find? Don't give up treatment. I'm going to the capital," Li Xian said with a long sigh. Li Yi patted his chest and glanced at him. This old man can't even speak clearly. Go to the capital, go to the capital. It's not like you're going to hell. Do you have to be so desperate and want to commit suicide? Chapter 283. Winter was not a good season to bid farewell. There had been no snowflakes since the spring festival. Otherwise, he could copy Shou Yingjing's poem for him. Song of White Snow sends Li Xian back to capital city. The north wind blows the white grass and it snows in August. I'm leaving tomorrow. Tonight I'll treat you to a drink in Jade's yard. Don't go home until you're drunk. Li Xian waved his hand and said straightforwardly. Li Yi did not understand how his jadeite yard came about. He went to jadeite yard to listen to music, he went to jadeite yard to eat, he went to jadeite yard to drink, but strangely he never did anything serious there. Forget about Jade's yard. Let's go to Rui yard as usual. Drunkenness would cause trouble. It was okay in his own home and nothing would happen. But in a brothel, Li Yi was really worried about his chastity. Don't be so wishy-washy. What's so good about Rui yard? Let's go to Jade's yard. Li Xian took the lead and 2 guards carried Li Yi, who was very reluctant. In Yang Liuking's surprised eyes they soon disappeared. The night was always the busiest time in the brothels, especially on the 1st and 15th day of every year. It was the day when the brothels competed for the courtesan bell. All the famous courtesans tried their best to get a high ranking. This was a great help to improve their fame and value. If they could become one of the top 10 courtesans, they would be pursued by countless people in the following year, and they would gain both wealth and fame. For their girls, all the brothels actively cooperated with the publicity. Prostitutes who were rarely seen, performed on the stage one after another, which naturally attracted the attention of a group of wolves. When the beauties glanced around, they wanted to empty their pockets. The business of a brothel in one day was comparable to that of 10 days or half a month before. Only artists were qualified to run for the title of courtesan belle. A withered flower could not attract the attention of those nobles. If one of the top 10 courtesans could settle down in his brothel, the next year's wealth would definitely roll in. Every courtesan was a cash cow for the brothel to which he belonged. Within the jadeite courtyard, after passing through the winding corridors and isolating the noise outside, a woman stood quietly by a table in a secluded room. Her wrist slowly moved as if she was drawing something on a piece of paper. Drunkenimo, you can't always not go out to meet the guests. The courtesan competition has already started. Mom is relying on you to make us proud. The jade courtyard's madam stood beside her and urged. Don't we still have Xianxia and Miao Miao? The woman added a few more strokes on the paper and said casually. The brothel keeper's face turned bitter as she said, "Oh, my great aunt, how can they compare to you? Listen to Mama's advice, go out and show your face. Even if it's just to play a song or sing a few lines, it's good enough. How many young masters want to see you by name? Mom is doing this for your own good. If you don't win the title of courtesan belle this year, your future days will be difficult. Without fame, Mom won't be able to stop those nobles." Got it. The woman sighed helplessly. Good. Mom will go prepare now. A smile immediately appeared on the madam's face and she hurriedly retreated. Her personal maid, Xiao Cui, supported her chin with one hand and murmured, "Young miss, I heard that Lu Xiaoqiao of Yichuan Brothel and Lu Yi of Golden Phoenix Courtyard have the most support for this year's courtesan belle. Many famous scholars have written poems to praise them. Young Master Su gave Lu Yi 3,000 taels of silver, and many people are envious of her. Yang Yenzhou wrote a poem for Lu Xiaoqiao, and her supporters immediately surpassed Lu Yi's. Young Miss has never met those scholars. What will you do if you don't win the title of courtesan belle?" The maid's worry was not without reason. The courtesan belle election was obviously based on popularity. If a noble spent a lot of money on a certain lady, or if a talented scholar produced a masterpiece, it would greatly boost popularity. The courtesan belle was naturally the center of attention and countless men would fight for it. If they met someone they liked, they just had to nod their head and their marriage would be settled. Those who didn't win the title of courtesan belle would naturally lose a lot of popularity. Without fame, those nobles wouldn't care if you were a virgin or not. Sometimes they would even use some forceful methods and no one would stop them. A virgin who lost her virginity was naturally no longer a virgin. In the end, she would end up like most prostitutes selling flesh for a living. Xiao Cui was still murmuring to herself. Zheng Zimo came out of her cage-like room and looked up at the sky outside the window. A trace of desire appeared in her eyes, but it quickly turned into helplessness. "Xiao Cui." The muttering girl raised her head. "Prepare hot water, I want to take a bath." "All right." Li Xian gulped down a cup of wine and stared at the stage, clapping his hands with all his might. After Li Xian's guard presented 2 silver ingots, the girl on the stage, wearing a gauze dress and revealing her navel, danced even more enthusiastically. There were almost no empty seats in the hall. When the two of them came earlier, there weren't actually any seats. After Li Xian's guard put his arm around a fat man's neck and said a few words intimately, the fat man smiled and gave up the seat that was supposed to belong to him. As the girl twisted her waist, a burst of cheers came from below the stage from time to time. Regardless of whether it was a burly man or a refined scholar, they all stared at the stage without blinking, as if they wanted to see under the gauze dress. Some even stared at the girl's navel and drooled. Li even saw a guy in the corner with his hand in his crotch, not knowing what he was doing. They were all a bunch of good-for-nothings. A simple twist of the navel was enough to make them so excited. Had they seen striptease or pole dance before? Even though he hadn't seen it himself, his horizons were at least 1,000 years ahead of them, so he wasn't as unbearable as they appeared. At this moment he was focusing on the delicacies in front of him. He had to admit that the dishes here had their merits. Putting aside those fancy dishes that didn't taste very good, this dish called Blaze of Colors was actually a side dish made of shredded radish mixed with an unknown substance. It was very delicious and went very well with the rice. Young master, look at him. He looks like he hasn't eaten for a few days. A chuckle came from the side. Li Yi turned his head and saw two young masters sitting there. At this moment one of the younger ones was pointing at Li Yi with his finger. He was smiling so widely that he couldn't even open his eyes. He spat in his heart and turned his head away. A grown man actually covered his mouth when he was laughing. Perhaps he had some special fetish. If he looked at him any longer he wouldn't be able to eat anymore. Don't be rude. Seeing the other handsome young master gently open his hand, the action of a grown man was actually very seductive. Li Yi felt even more disgusted. He couldn't help but move a little to the side to avoid being affected by these two traps. Chapter 284. Young master, that person looks so familiar. I seem to have seen him somewhere. Li Yi didn't want to pay attention to the two effeminate young men, but the guy who laughed at him just now said again. He couldn't help but turn his head to look at them. They were very strange faces and he was sure that he had never seen them before. The two young men were very handsome. Li Yi looked at them again and then he immediately shivered. He actually felt that these two guys were good-looking just now. They were just sissies. Not only did they look like a sissy but they also talked like a sissy. He made a face at the guy who pointed at him and continued to fight with the food in front of him. Poof! The young man who had just taken a sip of tea next to him and had not had time to swallow it saw his face. He couldn't help but spit out the tea in his mouth and hurriedly took out a handkerchief to wipe his mouth. Li Yi, who inadvertently caught a glimpse of this scene, immediately felt a chill in his heart. Seeing a beautiful sissy wiping the corners of his mouth with a handkerchief, no matter how delicious the food was, he couldn't eat anymore. Who would carry a handkerchief with them? However, what made him feel strange was how the two little submissives came together. After all, two tigers cannot live in the same mountain. How could a table accommodate two sissy? For the sake of what he had just eaten, Li Yi decided to turn his back to them and sat next to them. Your wife is strict. You have never seen such a scene, have you? Li Xian saw Li Yi change to a seat with a wide view facing the dancers on the stage and his face showed a little complacency. Li Yi curled his lips disdainfully. When he secretly watched the Japanese bisexual, he didn't know where this guy was. It was a big scene to show his belly button. If he saw the striptease of the future he would have a nosebleed. As if he didn't see the disdain on his face, Li Xian tempted him and said, "Anyway, you have nothing to do here. Why don't you go to the capital with me? The brothels in the capital can't be compared with here. More than half of the world's famous prostitutes are in the capital. They won't let you down. What's more, once you get there, your wife won't be able to control you anymore. You can do whatever you want." Li Xian tried to use this matter to tempt Li Yi. He went to the capital alone and he didn't know when he would return. Without Li Yi, when his research encountered difficulties he might not be able to get any inspiration, and it might be put on hold indefinitely. But it seemed that Li Xian's grimace had made the handsome boy next to him feel dissatisfied with Li Yi. When he heard Li Xian talk about brothels and famous prostitutes in the capital, he secretly spat and showed an incomparably disdainful expression. Forget it. I plan to spend the rest of my life in Qingyan Prefecture. I have no intention of going to the capital. I wish you all the best. Li Yi raised his cup and drained it in one gulp. Li Xian was very disappointed with his refusal. Immerse was right. This guy didn't have any great ambitions. No matter what kind of temptation he used, it was of no use. He didn't know if Uncle Huang had any other reason for summoning him to the capital other than to complete the wedding. Although the capital was good, it was still more comfortable in Qingyan Prefecture. Hey, you two little brothers, you look unfamiliar. You're not regulars here, are you? The handsome boy was looking at Li Yi and Li Xian with a disdainful expression. He thought to himself that these two looked talented on the outside, but their hearts were so unbearable. Suddenly, a figure appeared beside him. When he turned his head, he saw a large man sitting next to him. There was a smoky smell on his body and he quickly moved to the side. It's the first time I've seen the two of you, but I feel like I've known you for a long time. I wonder what your names are. The large man smiled and reached out to touch the boy's hand on the table. What are you doing? The handsome boy jumped in fright and immediately jumped away from his seat. He looked to his companion beside him for help. Young master. Li Yi actually saw a trace of lust in the large man's eyes. That's right, it was lust. A big man actually showed an evil gaze to two other men. Damn, this man looked so strong, but he was actually a dead piece of glass. It's nothing, I just want to make two more friends. The smile on the man's face became even wider. As he spoke, he reached out to touch the other person's cheek. Please conduct yourself. The young man immediately stood up and said with a livid face. The attention of the surrounding people was originally focused on the increasingly enchanting dancers on the stage. Suddenly they heard a reprimand and all turned their heads. Why is it him? This guy is here to look for those handsome young masters again? It's a pity for those two handsome young masters. The crowd was clearly very familiar with this large man. Their faces all showed disgust. Some people even moved away to keep a sufficient distance from him. The large man's eyes narrowed. He looked at the two people and said, "It's just to make friends, you don't have to go so far. Young master, let's go." The handsome boy pulled the young man's hand and said in a low voice with a pale face. Looking at the unfriendly large man, the young man's face also turned pale. He somewhat regretted sneaking out tonight. Just as he was about to pull the boy away, the large man sneered and blocked in front of them. He said, "The fun has just begun, don't be in such a hurry to leave." Li Yi sighed and planned to stand up. He didn't have a good impression of the two sissies. He didn't discriminate against the large man's fetish. However, this kind of thing was about mutual consent. There was no point in forcing or threatening them. As the county lieutenant of this county, since he encountered this kind of thing, he couldn't just stand by and watch. However, the human feelings of this era were far from as indifferent as the future. There was no lack of heroes who would pull out their swords to help when seeing injustice. His Highness, who always had a strong sense of justice, was clearly such a hero. Scram, don't disturb this young master's mood. Li Xian's method was simple and crude. He stood in between the large man and the two people with a disdainful expression. He acted like a spoiled brat to the extreme. A few guards already followed him. If the large man made any strange movements, he would immediately be cut into pieces. The boy and the young man looked at him with eyes filled with deep gratitude. Oh, this little brother is quite handsome. The large man originally wanted to get angry, but when he saw that the person in front of him was actually a similarly handsome young master, a smile appeared on his face. Li Yi noticed that Li Xian's expression was starting to freeze. He knew that this guy was finished. If it were him, he would have already demonstrated a whole set of 18 dragons subduing palms on this man's body. Knowing that the person in front of him was helping him out, the young man hurriedly cupped his hands towards Li Xian and said, "Thank you, young master." Step back. Li Xian's face was cold. He extended his arm and signaled the two people to step back. When he accidentally touched the young man's chest, he lightly patted it twice. He looked at him in surprise and said, "I couldn't tell, but this brother's body is quite sturdy." Young master. The boy watched as the man patted his young master's chest twice. He was speechless with his mouth wide open. As for the young man who was praised by Li Xian for having a sturdy body, he lowered his head to look at his chest. After a moment of shock, he raised his head to look at Li Xian in disbelief. His face was already completely red. Li Xian no longer cared about the young man. He turned around and looked coldly at the large man. He said indifferently, "Drag him out." These days he had accumulated a lot of resentment in his heart. It was time to vent it. At first the large man did not understand his words. However, when his shoulders were pressed down and he could no longer use any strength, his face began to turn pale. The large man was dragged out by Li Xian's guards. Li Xian also followed. Li Yi knew that he was angry. This man had appeared at the right time. As for the two young men, they were still standing in the same place in a daze. It was unknown if they were frightened, but they did not move at all. The situation here only attracted the attention of a small number of people. When a deafening cheer came from the scene, everyone's eyes were attracted by the dancer on the stage. Li Yi also turned his head to take a look. He found that she had actually pulled off the light gauze covering her body, revealing two smooth jade arms. She only wore a tube top, revealing her two voluptuous breasts. From time to time her jade legs would poke out of her skirt, causing a group of wolves to howl. So this was the erotic dance in the brothel. Li Yi took a glance and lost interest. He planned to go out and take a look. He stood up from his seat. When he saw Yang Liuqing and another figure appear at the door, he suddenly stopped and his expression changed. Chapter 285. Master, the jadeite courtyard they mentioned just now should be here. Yang Liuqing raised his head, looked at the horizontal board above and asked tentatively, should we go in and look for it? Standing at the door, they saw a scantily dressed woman flirting on the stage, and the men below the stage were making a fool of themselves. Lu Rui frowned. How could a decent woman go to such a place? She turned her head, looked to the side and walked straight over. Seeing that she didn't correct her master just now, Yang Liuqing was secretly happy and followed her closely. A scream came from the corner not far away. Several figures surrounded the corner, and the scream was extremely shrill and tragic. After a while, Li Xian walked out from inside with a satisfied face. He stretched his muscles and felt that his whole body was extremely comfortable, and his mood immediately became much better. He let out a long sigh of relief, and when he looked up he saw two pairs of unkind eyes. He blinked his eyes and said naturally, "What a coincidence, ladies." Li Yi found that nothing good would happen when he met Li Xian, especially when he was dragged to the jadeite courtyard. Rui was at the door and going out now was no different from courting death. If she caught him going to the brothel to watch erotic dances, he would have no place to hide his face in the future. He slipped away from the table with his waist bent. He couldn't go to the front door, so he quietly went around to the back. When he saw a small door, he quickly went in. Not long after, several young childs swaggered into the jadeite courtyard. A handsome, fair-faced young man shook his folding fan, glanced around the hall and shook his head. No. Another young child immediately looked at the young man in the front. Li Xian also looked confused. He pointed to a table that had been occupied by someone and said, "It's impossible. He was here just now." He looked back at the guards and asked, "You guys, did you see him go out just now?" No. The guards shook their heads. The young man weighed the folding fan in his hand and said indifferently, "Go in and look for it." The dance on the stage had obviously reached the most intense and exciting time, and the dancers' movements were more open and bold. Shameless. The handsome young man's face turned red with just one glance and he secretly spat. When he turned around and saw that the young man's face was also a little red, his heart calmed down a lot, but he no longer dared to look at the stage. Damn it, don't tell me there's no back door in this jade courtyard? Who knew how many corridors, how many moon gates and how many twists and turns? He actually returned to the starting point. He planned to sneak over to see if Rui had left. Just as he took a step forward, he saw two handsome young masters walking out from the small door. When he took a closer look, he realized that they were not handsome young masters at all. They were Lu Rui and Yang Liuqing disguised as men. Others might not be able to recognize them easily if they changed their clothes and tied up their hair, but how could Li Yi not recognize them after getting along with them for so long? There was still a distance to the nearest moon gate. It was definitely too late to retreat and it was a dead end to go forward. Li Yi wished he could use the earth burrowing technique at this time. Squeak. The door next to him opened a gap, like a strong light in the darkness. After being startled for a moment, Li Yi stepped in without any hesitation. When the two handsome young masters looked over, there was no one in the courtyard. Who are you? Get out quickly." A panicked voice sounded in his ear, and a girl in a green shirt screamed and wanted to push him out of the door. The tigress was right outside, and only a fool would go out at this time. Of course, the girl's strength was no match for Li Yi. She stood still and said, "Sorry, I didn't mean to offend you. I just want to hide here for a while, please." Li Yi stopped halfway through his sentence and couldn't continue. Because in the room, other than him and the girl, there was another person. Facing him was a moon gate, and inside the moon gate was a bed. There was a large bathtub beside the bed, and a girl stood next to the bathtub. She was naked, and there were still many water droplets on her. She must have just come out of the bath. Everything was in one glance. At this moment, Li Yi seemed to see the most perfect work of art created by the heavens. His mind was blank, and he couldn't hear the servant girl's screams anymore. The sounds of the outside world also gradually disappeared. Only the figure in front of him became clearer and clearer. "Have you seen enough?" A cold voice came over, and there was an irrepressible anger in the voice. He was pulled back to reality by this voice. Regardless of whether he had seen enough or not, the most important thing to do at this time was to immediately turn around. Li Yi faced the door, and there was a rustling sound behind him. The girl in a green shirt opposite him looked at him as if there was a flame burning in her eyes. Li Yi sighed in his heart. He had really offended her this time. "I think I saw him go in just now." A clear voice came from outside the door, and there was a knock on the door. Li Yi's expression changed again. Yang Liuqing knocked on the door, and a moment later the door opened. A girl in a green shirt stuck her head out and asked, "Who are you people?" Is Li Yi inside? Li Xian was the first to ask. The girl nodded and said, "Li is discussing painting techniques with my Mississippi. Are you friends of Li?" When Li Xian and the other two walked into the room, they saw Li Yi standing next to the table, and it seemed like he was painting. A young girl stood next to him and looked at him attentively. The two of them were dressed neatly and did not look messy at all. It did not seem like they were doing something dirty. Lu Rui's gaze swept around the room. The room was not big, and it was filled with a faint fragrance. It was not bedtime yet, so it was a bit strange to put down the curtain on the moon door. However, it was normal for outsiders to enter a woman's boudoir. "Look here, as long as you make a small adjustment to the proportion, the three-dimensional feeling will be greatly enhanced. When you usually paint, you have to pay attention to the changes in the proportion." Li Yi told Zheng Zumo the technique of three-dimensional painting with a serious expression. He turned around and saw Li Xian. He asked curiously, "Why are you back again?" He then looked at the two people next to Li Xian. After a moment of shock, his face showed an extremely shocked expression. "Rui, you too." The brothel keeper rushed in from outside and was stunned to see so many people in the room. She quickly recovered and walked to Zheng Zumo and said, "Zumo, get ready. It's time for you to go on stage." "Sorry, please excuse me." Zheng Zumo smiled apologetically at them and said to the girl in green, "Xiao Cui, help me entertain these guests." "Yes, miss," the girl said obediently. Zheng Zumo walked out of the room. The girl turned around and said, "Guests, why don't you wait here for a moment? Miss will be back in half an hour at most. No need to trouble yourself." Li Yi waved his hand and turned to Li Xian. "I happened to meet Miss Zumo and discussed painting skills with her. Since Miss Zumo has something to do, let's go back." "Let's go." Li Xian waved his hand. He had just beaten up the man and vented his anger. Since there was no big news, he had no intention of staying here. "What's the hurry? Since we are here, let's watch for a while before leaving. This is my first time in a brothel. I won't have this opportunity in the future." Lu Rui looked at Li Yi with a meaningful look and said lightly, "No, it's improper for a woman to go to a brothel." Li Yi refused without even thinking about it. Bringing his sister-in-law to a brothel, what the f***ck was that? Chapter 286. It turned out that Mississippi Lu shouldn't be restricted by the demands of secular women. She wasn't asking for Li Yi's opinion when she said that she wanted to visit a brothel. She was just announcing it. With one hand behind his back and the other waving a folding fan, the temperament of an elegant young master was undoubtedly revealed. Looking at the flirtatious glances of the brothel girls, Li Yi really wanted to yell, "Are you guys blind? Changing clothes and hairstyles and you can't even recognize the gender? In the past he thought that it was bullshit to disguise a woman as a man in TV dramas. As long as one wasn't blind they would be able to see it. Now it seemed that he had wronged the scriptwriter. Young masters, are there any girls that catch your eye? I'll arrange them for you right away. The brothel keeper ran over enthusiastically and glanced at Lu Rui and Yang Liuqing with a strange look. She said to Li Xian with a face full of smiles. With her sharp eyes, how could she not see that there were actually 2 girls over there? However, this young master Li used to be a regular customer here. He often came to Zui Mo's concert and was generous. He left a deep impression on her after listening to the song. Just arrange a good seat. You don't have to worry about the rest. Li Yi waved his hand and said. The brothel keeper knew the rules of this Li in front of her. She ordered someone to clean up an excellent seat on the 2nd floor and immediately brought them over. As for the original customers, she naturally found an excuse to send them away. Seeing Li Yi glaring at him with dissatisfaction, Li Xian made an innocent expression, meaning that this matter had nothing to do with him. Not knowing what kind of tricks Mississippi Lu was going to play, Li Yi couldn't just leave. He simply sat there openly. The brothel keeper was quite good at doing things. The position of this cubicle was very good. It had a wide field of view and could see the whole stage. There were many cubicles like this. The outside was blocked by a bead curtain, so the situation inside couldn't be seen clearly. However, the stage could be seen clearly from the inside. Li Xian casually sat on the chair and crossed his legs, looking very relaxed and content. Yang Luqing had never been to a brothel before, so she was very curious about everything here. Occasionally, she would see women nestled in the arms of those men in the cubicles on the opposite side, and when they were being groped by those men, her face would turn red and she would not look anymore. Lu Rui seemed to be addicted to playing the role of a handsome young master. He waved his folding fan in his hand and looked down through the bead curtain with great interest. Ever since the woman in the room came out, the crowd seemed to be boiling. It was obvious that she was quite famous. Lu Rui looked back at Li Yi and saw that he was sitting on the chair, staring blankly. Li Yi was indeed. The scene just now was his eyes. Li that out and couldn't be away. He glanced at the figure below and the feeling in his heart was a little complicated. Although she had appraised a lot of erotic films in her previous life, it was the first time in both of her lives that she had seen such a scene with her own eyes. Even though she had put on her clothes now, the scene in the room just now still appeared in her mind. Listening to Miss Zui Mo play the zither is simply a great enjoyment in life. Although Miss Zui Mo is proficient in zither, chess, calligraphy and painting, the most amazing thing is her painting skills. Many people want to have a painting and Miss Zui Mo never shows her paintings to others easily. Although it is impossible for her to get the first place in the top 10 courtesans this time, there will definitely be a place for her. Although he couldn't see the specific situation in the surrounding cubicles, the sound could be heard. Li Yi took a deep breath, picked up the tea on the table and took a sip, forcing the scene just now out of his mind. The woman could forget this matter very quickly as if nothing had happened and he was not petty. Li Yi didn't know that in the gauze tent, Xingzimo's expression was calm, but the slight rise and fall of her chest and crimson neck showed that her heart was not as calm as Li Yi thought. It was nothing more than being born in such an environment. She had long been used to hiding her emotions. On the surface, nothing could be seen, but the waves in her heart could not be suppressed. Although she was in a brothel, she had been raised as a chaste person since she was a child, and all the people who taught her were women. She had never been seen by a man. He thought that she would be extremely angry, but the strange thing was that at that time, apart from embarrassment and annoyance, there was no anger. She even helped him put on that show. Now that he thought about it, he seemed to be a little too calm at that time. She was already very proficient in zither skills. Although it was not superb, it could be said that she had reached a high level. However, when her heart was in a mess, the sound of the zither was naturally messed up. In a short period of time she had played wrong several times. Although she had covered it up very well for those who were proficient in music theory, it was impossible to hide it. Strange, what's wrong with Miss Sumo today? She has played wrong several times. Yes, is the person playing the guqin really Lady Zuemo? What? Wrong? Don't talk nonsense if you don't understand. I think Miss Sumo plays very well. There was a commotion in the hall. Xingzimo took a deep breath, calmed down and wanted to play in peace. However, the more she wanted to calm down, the more irritated she felt. Even those who didn't know anything about music could hear some clues. Is this really Miss Sumo? Could it be that the rumors about her zither skills are all false? Indeed, the level that she has shown today is really inconsistent with the rumors. If this matter were to spread out, it would be hard to say if she would be able to obtain the title of top courtesan. The others are all trying their best to build up their reputation. Among them, Lu Yi and Lu Xiaoxiao are the most popular. Lu Yi was raised up by the Su family. If they throw out enough money, they might be able to become the champion. Lu Xiaoxiao had always been very close to those scholars. Once Yang Yanzhou's poem was sent out, it attracted many scholars to follow suit. So many scholars were willing to support her. I heard that even the #1 scholar of Qingyan Prefecture, Li Yi, who replaced Yang Yanzhou a few days ago, was also interested in Lu Xiaoxiao. He planned to give her a poem during the competition for the top courtesan. Lu Yi probably couldn't compete with her. Miss Sumo doesn't compete at all and has rejected so many scholars. This has already made them very dissatisfied. They will definitely not support her like last year. If she is kicked out of the top 10 courtesans this year, it will be fun. Without the reputation of the top courtesan, it is only a matter of time before she falls into the mundane world. Perhaps you and I will also have the chance to get intimate and spend the night with a beauty. Li Xian looked at Li Yi with some surprise and asked, "You plan to give Lu Xiaoxiao a poem to help her become the top courtesan? I don't even know what Lu Xiaoxiao looks like. Why would I give her a poem?" Li Yi was also confused. He didn't know where this rumor came from. Hype, pure hype. I think so too. If you give Lu Xiaoxiao a poem, I'm afraid there will be many heartbroken girls in Qingyan Prefecture. Those who want to become the top courtesan will definitely fight you to the death. Li Xian nodded and said. Although many aspects were considered in the competition for the top courtesan every year, those scholars played a decisive role. There was nothing better than a widely spread poem to make them famous. Qiao 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 dances with a soft waist. Zhang Tai Lu Zhao Yang Yan. Yi has been able to sing and dance since she was young. Her actions and expressions are all like those of Chu. Miao Miao holds a wooden board and a cluster of flowers and pearls, singing a new voice. If a scholar wrote such a poem for them and the poem spread, their fame would definitely soar. If these words were written by the #1 scholar of Qing and Prefecture, the effect would be even better. When the poem was spread by word of mouth, no matter how unknown Qiao Qiao, Yi and Miao Miao were before, they would be known by countless people overnight. Although this #1 scholar was so low-key that many people had even forgotten his name, Li Xian could be sure that if he wrote a poem for a girl, the position of the top courtesan would not be contested by others. They would just go and do what they were supposed to do. Chapter 287. There's something wrong with Sumo today. Behind the stage, the procuress of the Jade Courtyard frowned and murmured as she listened to the music. When she was young, she was also the most beautiful girl for a time. She dabbled in zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting. Although she had never touched those things after changing professions, she still had the ability to appreciate them. There was something wrong with the music today. A woman with phoenix eyes next to the procuress waved a round fan in her hand. She glanced down and said, "Who knows? She is the top girl in the courtyard. Even if her zither skills are a little worse, it doesn't matter. There are still so many stinky men who are willing to support her." "Not necessarily." Another woman in a pink gauze dress with a sharp chin said, "Young Master Qin is supporting Lu Xiaoxiao this year. I heard that he has written a lot of poems for her. Young Master Zhu just spent 500 taels of silver on Lu Yi early in the morning. As for young Master Xiao," he glanced at the woman with phoenix eyes and said in a strange tone, "Touch your conscience and tell me how many times he has asked to see you this month. Don't think that I don't know what the two of you have been doing in the room. Is it my fault that young Master Xiao likes me?" The woman with phoenix eyes rolled her eyes at her, but her tone was full of schadenfreude. The young Master Qin, young Master Zhu, and young Master Xiao they mentioned were all people who strongly supported Zheng Zimo last year. Without their support, she might not have a place among the top 10 beauties last year. However, during this time no one knew what had gotten into her. She hid in her room all day writing and painting. She never saw guests and even refused the invitation of these 3 young masters. Being humiliated, the three of them were naturally dissatisfied. In this day and age, who didn't support was the same. Without Zheng Zimo, there was still Zhang Zimo and Li Zimo. Why should they think too much? What did you just say? What happened to young Master Qin, young Master Zhu, and young Master Xiao? Tell me clearly. The procuress' face changed and asked hurriedly. What else can it be? Zuamo doesn't want to see them, and they have already turned to support someone else. Mom, if you want to support another top beauty, you have to put in more effort. The woman with a sharp chin said in a weird tone. Get lost, both of you. You traitors. You don't want to see me do well, do you? If the Jade Field courtyard collapses, the two of you will have nothing to eat in the future. An angry expression appeared on the madam's face. She raised her hand and viciously slapped the two of them on the back a few times. The two of them screamed and ran away. When the madam looked at the figure playing the zither below again, her expression began to fluctuate. Drunk Ink was the star of the Jadeite courtyard and her money tree. At least 30% of the guests who came to the Jadeite courtyard came for her. Every brothel would have such a pillar. As long as the pillar did not fall, the business of the brothel would always be prosperous. The reason that the Jadeite courtyard could occupy a place among so many brothels in Qing and Prefecture was because one of the top 10 top beauties was here. She was their signature. No matter how good the other girls were, this signature was indispensable. Without this signature, they would immediately become a second-rate brothel. Young Master Qin was an outstanding talent among the talents and had great influence. Young Master Zhu was rich and never stingy with money. Young Master Zhao's father was a judge. If two of the three of them were willing to support her, the position of top beauty would be very secure. She thought that the three young masters would continue to support Drunk Ink. But the procuress' face darkened. Her eyes began to flicker as she looked down the stage. You don't plan to support Miss Drunk Ink? Hearing the discussions around him, Li Xian turned to look at Li Yi and asked. Forget it. It's better not to get involved in these things. Li Yi shook his head. Every time he threw out a poem there would be a lot of trouble. He didn't want to get involved in the selection of top beauty. As long as you don't regret it. From the looks of it, Miss Drunk Ink's position as top beauty this year is uncertain. But this isn't a bad thing. If she really isn't the top beauty, her value will definitely plummet. If you want to take her back as a concubine, you can save a lot of money. But you have to do this as soon as possible because there will be a lot of people eyeing her. Li Xian still thought that there was an unknown affair between Li Yi and Zheng Zimo, so he kindly reminded him. If you have time to worry about whether I can get a concubine or not, you should think more about your princess. Li Yi said impatiently. Li Xian's expression immediately turned bitter. He wasn't interested in playing with Mississippi Lu anymore. He stood up from the chair, walked to Lu Rui and said, If you've seen enough, let's go. Rui flicked his wrist, put away the folding fan, threw it on the table and followed Li Yi out. Yang Liuqing naturally followed. Zheng Zimo walked over with the guqin in her arms and happened to meet Li Yi, who had walked out of the compartment. She nodded slightly and then walked straight over. Many people in the hall were whispering. Strange, there doesn't seem to be many people supporting Miss Drunk Ink this year. She never accepts other people's invitations. Could it be that she has no intention of competing for the top beauty? Yes, Lu Qiaoqiao and Lu Yi have been attending banquets frequently these days. They can't wait to rope in all the rich merchants and talents of Qingyan Prefecture. Even if others didn't make such big moves, they wouldn't be like Miss Drunk Ink, not even seeing guests. Could it be that she really doesn't want to compete for the top beauty? That's not necessarily a bad thing. Everyone's eyes are on those top courtesans, so it's not easy to make a move. If she's not a top courtesan anymore, she'll just be an ordinary prostitute who can be combed with some money. Maybe we can have a taste of her. Walking out of the jade courtyard, a gust of cold wind blew in his face and he became much more sober. Another two people came out. The handsome young man who had just been teased by the big man glared at Li Yi and ran away with the young man. Li Yi was stunned for a moment. He looked back at Lu Rui and Yang Liuqing, who had come out and seemed to understand something. Looking again at Li Xian, who swaggered out of the jade courtyard and pretended to be a playboy, he shook his head and didn't say anything more. The next day, Li Yi saw a large group of people from King Ning Mansion on the street. The leader of Li Xian's guards rode on a horse and walked at the front of the group. The group quickly went out of the city gate. This guy finally left. Li Yi actually felt lonely for no reason. There was no one to discuss with him how to fly in the sky. More importantly, the dog meat hot pot was really delicious. Yang Liuqing would still report on time every day. Although Mississippi Lu still didn't agree to be her master, when she was in a good mood she would give her a few pointers. From then on, the courtyard would often be filled with whistling sword aura, and it was impossible to bask in the sun peacefully anymore. Uncle Master, there are more invitations. Yang Liuqing walked in from outside and handed something to Li Yi. Recently he had mysteriously received a lot of invitations. Lu Xiaoqiao, Lu Yi, and a few others he had never heard of invited him to all kinds of banquets. Li Yi always threw them to the side, and now he had accumulated a thick stack of invitations. This time, it was embroidered on a handkerchief. A trace of disappointment flashed across his eyes when he saw the signature, and he shook his head. Miss Ryun of Ichuan Brothel had asked him to compose a poem for her, and the reward was 500 taels. That girl was quite rich. He casually threw the handkerchief to the side. He didn't know how they had found out about his family, but in order to compete for the title of courtesan for a poem, they were willing to do anything. Some gave him silver, some gave him paintings, some gave him antiques, and there were even some who hinted that they could have a night with him. There were also people who tried to save the country in a roundabout way. Even Rui had received many invitations. Chapter 288. Since there are so many invitations, if you have time, it's not a problem for you to attend a few of them. Rui put away the handkerchief and looked at him as she spoke. She had also received many invitations these days, some private and some public. They were extremely polite and vaguely mentioned that they hoped she would bring her husband along. At first she would tactfully refuse, but after seeing more of them she was too lazy to pay attention to them. At this moment she felt that although her husband never attended such banquets, it was necessary to socialize in life. Otherwise he would offend many people. Her husband didn't have many friends to begin with. After Li Xian and that arrestor Li left, he spent most of his time alone. I won't go. Li Yi's answer was very straightforward. I'm afraid my wife doesn't know who they are. Their purpose is not pure and it will be troublesome if you go. Of course, Li Yi knew what their purpose was. It was nothing more than using him to create hype. The competition for the courtesan bell was the most intense. Everyone wanted to have more bargaining chips in their hands. If one person attended an invitation, there would definitely be a second or third person. It was rare for him to have a few days of leisure, so he didn't want to get involved in this quagmire again. Those who should have appeared did not appear, and a lot of insignificant people appeared. So Lu Rui didn't say anything more. She received 2 more invitations this morning. Since her husband didn't want to go, there was no point in keeping the ox. She might as well get rid of it together. The most direct impact of the courtesan bell competition on Li Yi was that he had much less time to slack off than usual. Before the courtesan bell was selected during the Lantern Festival, there was no curfew in Qing, an prefectural city. The bailiffs also had to go out to patrol at night. Although the county magistrate didn't have to do everything by himself, he still had to sit in the county government at critical times. It was one thing that no one cared about him, but there was a limit to his slacking off. Driven by the festival and the top courtesan competition, the business of the theater was booming day by day. Oldman's son didn't take the opportunity to expand his business. Instead he took a steady approach and managed several theaters in an orderly manner. He also arranged for the orphans to work in the theaters, such as making tea, pouring water, and wiping the tables. The older children in their early teens could still do the work. Since then, the flying female thief in the prefectural city had disappeared without a trace. When he walked back to the county government, several constables on duty were squatting in the duty room and chatting. The city gets more and more lively every day. It's so tiring to patrol from morning till night. It's so tiring, someone complained. Why are you so stubborn? You've been patrolling for a whole day. All you see are trivial things. You can't stop. You can just find a brothel and watch a performance. When it is time you can just come back and report. I have to say the performances in the brothels these days are not bad. Those girls are trying their best to fight for the title of top beauty. They are even using their best skills. Yesterday I saw a girl whose body was so soft that she could put her head on her butt. That's nothing. Guess who I saw when I went to the jadeite courtyard to see my lover a few days ago? The county lieutenant. I saw the county lieutenant enter a room. I asked my lover later. Guess whose room it was? Who? When it came to the county lieutenant's gossip, the people were obviously interested and asked one after another. You'll never guess. It was actually... Li couldn't let this guy go on. He walked behind the guy who just spoke and asked, "Aren't you afraid that the county lieutenant will know that you visited a brothel while patrolling?" The bailiff was talking about the county lieutenant's gossip and was in high spirits. He casually added, the county lieutenant won't be able to see it. It's not a big deal to be lazy. Speaking of laziness, who can compare with the county lieutenant? Let me tell you, you'll never guess whose room the county lieutenant went to that night in the jadeite courtyard. You'll be scared to death if I tell you. Halfway through his words, he finally felt something was wrong. The brother in front of him was winking at him. His heart sank. When he was about to turn his head, he was kicked on his buttocks. The constable who was kicked by Li lay on the ground like a dog eating mud. He did not dare to be angry. He scratched his head and smiled awkwardly as he got up. "Sir, why did you come at this time?" Li snorted and said, "If I didn't come, how would I know that you would be so bold to visit a brothel while patrolling? By the way, what did you want to say just now? Go on, I'm listening." Nothing. The bailiff had long known the county lieutenant's temper. As long as it didn't violate the principle, the county lieutenant wouldn't blame them. He said with a smile, "Sir, you may not know this. These days, because of the top beauty competition, the brothel is the most crowded place. It needs to be patrolled the most. We don't relax outside either. There are always people watching on the street. Since you all have nothing to do, go out and patrol. Whoever dares to go to the brothel will be sent to the detention room for 3 days." Li waved his hand and said impatiently. The crowd dispersed in a hubbub as if they had been granted amnesty. The detention room was not a place for people to stay. 3 days were enough to kill them. With the county lieutenant's words, no one dared to go to the brothel in the future. There was once a felon who refused to confess the hiding place of the murder weapon. The county lieutenant just let him stay in the detention room alone for 5 days. When he was released, the 8-foot-tall man cried like a child. As soon as he was released, he trembled and confessed. From then on, people regarded detention as the cruelest punishment. As soon as they stepped out of the door, someone immediately turned to ask the bailiff who just spoke, go on, whose room did the county lieutenant enter?" "Sister Ruoqing, please persuade my Mississippi in the room." The green-shirt girl grabbed Ruoqing's arm and said with a bitter face. "Miss refused those childs and didn't attend the banquet. Mother doesn't care about her anymore. She has been promoting Chen Miao these days. If Miss can't get the top beauty, what should we do?" The courtesan bell was a natural protective barrier. Without this barrier, the Miss would soon lose her chastity. Has been courtesan bell. At that time, the life of the master and the servant would definitely be very difficult. Everyone else was trying their best to build momentum for the top beauty, but her Miss was doing the opposite. As a servant, she was already very anxious. Wan Ruoqing patted Xiao Tui's hand and raised her head. She looked at the woman who was sitting there and doing her makeup with some confusion. She asked, "Drunk Imo, have you really thought it through and decided not to fight for the top beauty?" The woman took off a golden hairpin with pearls and jade hanging from it and placed it in a brocade box. She casually inserted a wooden hairpin into it and carefully closed the brocade box. She walked to Wan Ruoqing's side and took her hand. She said, "Sister Ruoqing, how about I work for you in the future? Anyway, when you guys perform, you won't be able to find anyone else to paint the background. Do you think I can be your personal painter? The background you paint is so lifelike. In the entire Qing'an prefecture, no one can do it better than you," Wan Ruoqing said with a smile. Then she seemed to realize something and looked at him in surprise. She asked, "Are you planning to, no one can do it better than me?" Zheng Zimo didn't seem to hear the second half of her sentence. She said, "Sister Ruoqing, you forgot about that person." When she said, "that person," although she gritted her teeth, her pretty face was covered with a layer of pink for no reason. Chapter 289. During this time there are people patrolling outside day and night. The security in the city is very good and there are no major cases. Lu Yi was reporting to Li Yi at a tea stall on the street. A floating corpse appeared in the river outside the Zhang family village, and its identity has not been identified yet. There have been no missing people in our county recently, and we have sent people to investigate every village. At another table a few steps away, 3 men were also talking and laughing loudly. Have you watched the top beauty competition these days? Miss Xiaoxiao and Miss Yi are competing fiercely. I'm afraid one of them will be the champion this year. In fact, there is nothing exciting about this competition. Last year's top 10 beauties will still occupy more than half of the seats this year. Moreover, no matter who is selected, we can only watch and can't touch them. That's not necessarily true. As long as there is either talent or wealth, even if it is the champion, there is still a chance to make love. Moreover, we can't touch the top beauty this year even if we can't touch the past. I don't know why the Jade Yard has been promoting Chen Miao Miao this year, and the Phoenix Perching Building has promoted a newcomer. You should know that Xing Zumo and Gu Shaoan were both candidates for the top 10 beauties last year, and I'm afraid they have no hope of being on the list this year. I wonder what the former top beauty tastes like. As the 3 men talked, they showed a smile that all men understood. Later, no one knew what they were talking about, but their smiles became lascivious and their voices became lower. Your Excellency, Your Excellency. Lu Yi said a lot and found that the county lieutenant did not respond. When he looked up, he found that there was no expression on his face, and his eyes were wandering, obviously absent-minded. He stretched out his hand and waved in front of Lu Yi's eyes. "Oh, what's wrong?" Li Yi came to his senses and asked, looking at him with confusion in his eyes. Lu Yi sighed in his heart. The county lieutenant had something on his mind, so what he said just now was in vain. As a subordinate, he should share the burden of his superior, so he changed the topic and said, "There is nothing important in the county government recently, but with the top beauty competition going on, the city will be more and more lively at night. I think we should double the number of people." "Well, do as you said and the others will be selected from the people." Li Yi clapped his hands, looked at the 3 men who were talking enthusiastically and turned to walk to the street. "Sir, be careful." Just as they reached the street, Lu Yishui suddenly shouted and grabbed Li Yi's arm, causing Li Yi to stumble. Lu Yishui had already stood up and pointed his saber in front of him. He said sternly, "Who are you? Quickly dismount from your horse." Horses are not allowed in the city. Those who violate this rule will be punished with 30 strokes of the cane. The sound of a horse's neigh came from the front. The young knight on the horse pulled the reins. The horse raised its front hooves, stirring up a cloud of dust, and quickly stopped. Li Yi frowned slightly. Places like prefectural cities were crowded with people and never allowed horses to gallop. This person's behavior just now was worthy of being brought back and beaten 30 times with a rod. If he hadn't been thinking about something just now, he wouldn't have missed it even though they were so close. "You're a constable here. Great, take me to the Anxi County government immediately." The rider didn't seem to care about what Lu Yichang had just said. Seeing Lu Yichang's clothes, he immediately raised his head and said arrogantly, "If you don't dismount from your horse, then go to the Anxi County government lying down." Li Yi looked at him and said coldly. Even Li Xian didn't dare to let his horse run wild on the streets. Could this ignorant fellow have a more powerful background than Li Xian in Qingyan Prefecture? "Who do you think you are?" Seeing that a weak scholar dared to threaten him, a trace of anger flashed across the rider's face. He raised the horsewhip in his hand and lashed it directly at Li Yi. "How dare you!" Lu Yishui shouted angrily and slashed at the horsewhip with his saber. This fellow actually dared to attack the magistrate. The magistrate was appointed by the current emperor and could be considered as an official of the imperial court. Even if this fellow was killed, he wouldn't have to bear the consequences. The rider acted quickly, but Lu Yishui was still a beat slower. However, just when the whip was about to hit Li Yi snorted coldly and stretched out his right hand to grab the head of the whip. With a sudden tug, the rider was forcefully pulled down from the horse. Before he could get up from the ground, Li Yi kicked his waist. The rider struggled for a while and felt that he had no strength in his body. He couldn't even speak. At this moment he no longer had the arrogance he had just now. His face was full of horror. Letting a horse loose in the city with the intention of harming an official of the imperial court. Bring him back to the county government and give him 80 strokes of the cane. Take him back to the county government and give him 80 strokes of the cane. Li Yi said indifferently. 2 constables ran over from a distance and immediately lifted the rider up. Just now he had used a secret skill taught by Rui. Within an hour this embroidered pillow wouldn't be able to exert any strength at all. Although Li Yi was not a master, he had been trained by the 2 peerless masters in his family. It was easy for him to deal with such an embroidered pillow. Yes. Lu Yishui cupped his hands and answered. He was very shocked by the county magistrate's skills. After Li Yi left, he looked at the rider ferociously. Take him back. Just now he had exercised a little on the street, which was a small interlude. The authority of Arrestor Emmingzu was still there. Even if the son of the magistrate made a mistake, the constables of Anxi County would arrest him without any fault. No matter how powerful the background of the offender was, once he entered the county government he would only be dealt with according to the law. Even if the offender really had a powerful background, the constables wouldn't dare to make trouble for him. Otherwise it would only cause more trouble. Of course, the magistrate didn't have a son. Therefore Lu Yishui and the others wouldn't feel any psychological pressure when they beat the guy with a stick. When he returned home and walked into the courtyard, he saw Rui throwing a stack of paper into the stove. When she saw Li Yi coming in, she smiled and said, I received a few more invitations this morning. I figured that you wouldn't go, so I burned them all. Li Yi nodded. When he walked to the door he seemed to have thought of something and paused. He turned around and asked, the invitations this morning? Who are they from? Lu Rui was stunned. She thought for a moment and said, Lu Xiao from Yichuan brothel sent another one. Lu Yi sent 2 and 500 taels of silver, but they were returned by me. In addition, Gu Shaowan from Perching Phoenix brothel and Jadeite courtyard. Li Yi's eyes lit up. Chen Miao Miao from Jadeite courtyard invites you to a banquet tonight. Lu Rui thought that he had changed his mind. She said apologetically, I didn't know what you were planning. I shouldn't have come so early. It's fine. So be it. Li smiled. A trace of disappointment appeared in his eyes as he walked into the room. Women's minds are so hard to guess. He paced around the room a few times and sighed. He walked to the desk and began to grind the ink. Young master, let me do it. Xiao Huan stood at the door and looked in. She immediately ran over and took the ink stick from Li Yi's hands. Yang Liuqing had almost finished all the work in the house these days. If she saw this, she would definitely fight with her for this. She loved watching the young master write and paint. Whether it was in the past or in the future, this position could only be hers, the servant girl thought to herself. Chapter 290. In the government office of Anxi County, the bailiffs watched the cane falling on the buttocks of the young knight with a strange look in their eyes. Half of the 80 strikes had been done. Besides twitching unconsciously because of the pain, the knight didn't make any sound from the beginning to the end. Although they didn't intend to kill him and chose the fleshy part of his buttocks, he would be able to jump around again after lying in bed for 10 days or half a month after the 80 strikes. However, the pain from the strike of the cane was real. Gradually, the bailiff's gazes on the knight turned solemn. This man was a man. Even Lu Yizhang's eyes changed. When they were on the street just now, he thought that the knight was just a playboy who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. He didn't expect that the knight was also a tough man. Let me do it. In order to show enough respect for this man, Lu Yizhang decided to do it himself. He walked over and took the cane from a bailiff. He's a good man. With a sigh of admiration, he raised the stick high and then brought it down. Ah! A heart-wrenching sound suddenly sounded. The knight found that he could finally make a sound, and his body seemed to have regained its freedom. Snot mixed with tears rolled down from his face, and he screamed like a pig being slaughtered. The admiration on the bailiff's faces froze. Continue. Lu Yizhang was annoyed. He thought that the knight was a tough man, but he didn't expect that the knight was also a coward. He waved his hand and said, The Lord said 80 strikes, so it can only be 80 strikes. No more or less. Whoosh. More than 10 people rushed into the hall. When the first person saw the young knight lying on the bench, he changed his face and said, Stop. County Magistrate Lu came in with an old man and asked with a frown, What's going on? Lu Yizhang cupped his hands and said, Your Excellency, This man rode his horse recklessly on the street and tried to attack the county magistrate. According to the law, he should be beaten 80 times. He has already been beaten 60 times. Rode his horse on the street and attacked County Magistrate Li? County Magistrate Lu glanced at the young knight and said lightly, then continued to beat him. We'll talk after that. Seeing County Magistrate Lu's attitude, Lu Yi knew that County Magistrate Lu's background might not be so powerful. After responding, he turned around and said to the Yamen runner, "Continue." The man who looked like a guard was about to speak, but the old man beside County Magistrate Lu waved his hand and said, "Since he has made a mistake, he should be punished." Then he looked at County Magistrate Lu and said with a smile, "About the matter I just mentioned, Registrar Zheng is not here." "Lu Yi, take this old man to the household," County Magistrate Lu said. "Thank you, Lord Lu." The old man cupped his hands and said. Lu Yi nodded. Half of the people that the old man brought stayed here while the other half followed Lu Yi to the house. The household register was where the household register was kept. When they reached the door, Lu Yizhong turned around and said, "Only 2 people can enter. The rest of you can wait outside." "Li Jing, come in with me, the others wait outside." The old man smiled, pointed to the man in the lead and walked in with him. Lu Yi stood outside. Naturally, there were scribes inside to greet them. Looking at the travel-worn people standing in the yard, he felt bored and habitually used the reasoning method that the county magistrate taught him to reason. These people seemed to have traveled for a long time and were definitely not from Qing'an Prefecture. They were arrogant and dared to be so arrogant in the prefectural city, so they definitely did not come from a small place. Most likely they came from the capital. Combined with County Magistrate Lu's attitude, this possibility immediately increased to 80%. Beside the desk, the little servant girl was slowly grinding ink, but her eyes were staring at Li Yi's hand. She watched as small square characters appeared on the white paper. Although the son-in-law had taught her to read a long time ago, she could only recognize a few words on the paper, such as beauty and under the moonlight. However, it did not matter if she did not recognize them. Looking at those beautiful words appearing on the paper made her feel inexplicably comfortable. Li Bai did not have time to be born, this should not be a problem. Cao Cao actually had 3 sons, but none of them were called Cao Ji or Cao Pai. This song is so famous, but I don't have any impression of it, so there is no more. After writing for a while, Li Yi would stop and murmur a few words. In his mind, information about this world kept flashing by. After filtering, he started writing again. Xiao Huan looked strangely at the son-in-law who was talking to himself. After grinding the ink, she saw the son-in-law hammering his shoulder. She immediately ran behind him, stretched out her small hand and gently pinched it. After pinching for a while, her wrist was a little sore, so she moved a small chair and sat opposite Li Yi. She placed her hands on the table and propped her head up. She tilted her head and blinked her big eyes. Looking at the shaking pen, she let out a small yawn. Every time he was immersed in his own world in his mind, time passed especially quickly. Li Yi could not remember how many books he had flipped through. It was only when he flipped to the last page of the book that he realized his arm was very sore. The light in the room was also a little dim. He raised his head and looked out the window. The sun was about to set below the mountains in the west. He put down the brush and rubbed his shoulder, waiting for the ink on the last page to completely dry. The little servant girl had fallen asleep in front of him. Chapter 291. I snuck out on my own. Don't tell our young miss. The girl named Xiao Chui trotted away. Seeing her back disappear at the end of the alley, the words she said before she left rang in Li Yi's ears again. This woman, what the hell is she doing? Li Yi rubbed his eyebrows and murmured. With her personality, it was impossible for her to give up on herself. What was the point of her inaction? It was actually Xiao Chui who sneaked over that made him realize that Zheng Zimo's situation had reached such a point. Was it because she was thin-skinned? However, regardless of whether what happened that night happened or not, Li Yi couldn't watch her passively accept that fate. If what Li Xian said was right with those things, the problem should have been solved by now, right? But why did he still feel irritable for no reason? Young master, it's time to eat. Xiao Huan's voice faintly came from inside. Li Yi temporarily suppressed the chaotic thoughts in his heart, turned around and walked back. The girl named Xiao Cui held the book tightly in her arms and ran out of the alley. The crowd on the street began to thicken. She slowed down and carefully took the book out of her arms. She flipped through a few pages and saw the dense handwriting on it. A smile immediately appeared on her pretty face. It seems that bad guy isn't that bad after all. She murmured to herself, bought a stick of tonghulu on the street and skipped forward. She had been with the young miss since she was a child. Although the young miss knew nothing about zither, chess, calligraphy and painting, at least she learned words and poems from the young miss. That bad guy was no longer a bad guy. That young master's poems were amazing. Last time in that garden he scared so many people. I also heard that those who wanted to compete for the top courtesan cried and begged him to write poems for them. Last time when her mother gave Qin Miao Miao 500 taels of silver and asked her to find that young master, she heard everything. What right did she, Qin Miao Miao, have to make that young master write a poem? She hadn't even ascended to become a phoenix yet. Recently she had been saying those weird things in front of young Mississippi. If it wasn't for young Miss stopping her, she would have torn her mouth apart. Wasn't it just because her mother wanted to make her a top courtesan? She wasn't as pretty as Miss and her talent was far from Mrs. More importantly, had she ever let that young master see her body? You can't compare to Miss in anything and you still want to be the courtesan queen? Dream on. There were also those people who begged him to write poems but they couldn't. She hadn't even opened her mouth today, but she had already gotten what they dreamed of. It could be seen that the young master still cared about her Miss. Thinking of this, Xiao Cui's heart was even happier. She sneaked into the jade courtyard from the back door. Miss had just gone out to look for Sister Ruoqing, so she had a chance to sneak out. She gently pushed the door open and heard a familiar voice. Xiao Cui, where did you go? She hurriedly hid the things in her arms. If Miss found out, she would definitely ask her to return them. She grinned, revealing 2 rows of white teeth and said, Miss, I just went out to buy 2 skewers of candied haws. I'll give you one. The sky was already completely dark. Finally there was movement from inside. Louis Zhang spat out the dried twig in his mouth and saw the old man and the young man walking out of the house. Sorry for the trouble. The old man cupped his hands and said. Old man, did you find what you wanted? Louis Zhang asked curiously. Louis Zhang guessed that seeing how sad the old man was, he must have found what he wanted. Moreover, the result didn't seem to be very satisfactory. The old man didn't directly answer. Instead he smiled and asked, Dare I ask this constable, is all the household registration of this county in here? Is there any missing? I can't say that all the household registration is here, but there shouldn't be much difference. Louis Zhang replied. Some time ago he had brought his brothers to check the population of each village. Except for those who hid in the mountains, the household registration of each village would be the same as the number of people. There shouldn't be any difference. Thank you. The old man smiled kindly. He pointed at the young man who was beaten today and was being supported by 2 guards. He said to Louis Zhang, I didn't discipline my subordinates well. He has just arrived at your mansion and has already made such a big mistake. I don't know. Louis Zhang waved his hand and said, Since you have already punished him, you can take him away. Just remember not to ride the horse in the town. County Magistrate Liu obviously didn't want to have a deep grudge with these people. He had specially told Louis Zhang these things during the day. He believed that the county lieutenant wouldn't say anything. Seeing this group of people leaving the county government, Louis Zhang stretched his body. It was time for him to go out and patrol. Otherwise, his subordinates would definitely take the opportunity to be lazy. He stretched his back and felt a little less tired. Fortunately, there were only a few days left before the Upper Era. After the Upper Era, there would be a curfew in the town again. He wouldn't have to suffer at night anymore. Uncle Li, are we going to the village now? The old man walked out of the county government with more than 10 guards. The man called Li Jing turned his head and asked. The old man called Uncle Li looked up at the sky and said, Let's find an inn to stay in first. We'll talk about it tomorrow morning. He turned his head and looked at the tall gate of the county government again. His face showed a strong sadness that couldn't be melted. Early the next morning, a group of people led horses out of the town. More than 10 guards quickly got on the horses. One horse pulled the carriage and galloped in a certain direction. An hour later, a group of strange guests came to the Li family village. It was strange, but it was because these people were all riding tall horses, and they looked travel-worn as if they had traveled for a long time. Outsiders came to this remote and desolate place, and most of them were poor relatives of some family in the village. When had there ever been such a scene? What brings you to the Li family village? Seeing these people get off the horses, the old man of the Li family village walked over and asked with cupped hands. He secretly winked at the Dezhuang brothers who were not far away. When they didn't know the purpose of these outsiders, it was always good to be vigilant. Old brother, this is the Li family village, right? Looking at the kind old man in front of him who didn't seem to be looking for trouble, the village head was slightly relieved and said, "This is the Li family village." "Old brother, do you know Li Minghan?" "Li Minghan. So they are here to find someone." The village head murmured this name. He had some impression of this name, but he couldn't think of it at the moment. The people in the village were all uneducated boorish people. Their names were Dezhuang, Ergo, Sanpao and so on. Li Minghan, such an elegant name, didn't seem like something the villagers could come up with. At this moment, another old villager murmured, "Li Minghan, is this the name of Li Xiaotsai?" The village head slapped his forehead and suddenly realized something. How could I forget about Li Xiaotsai? He turned his head to look at the old man and said, "Yes, there was such a person in the village. He moved here with his wife 20 years ago and later settled down in the village. He was the only Xiaotsai in the village, but he has been dead for many years. Is he the one you are looking for?" 20 years ago, yes, yes. Hearing the village head's description, 2 lines of turbid old tears fell from the old man's eyes. He choked and said, "Young master, I'm late." Chapter 292. Young master, this old servant should have stopped you back then. Beside a lone grave at the end of the Li family village, a dozen or so figures stood solemnly. The old man with the surname Li stroked the cold and rough tombstone, his expression sorrowful and full of self-blame. Not far behind the crowd, the villagers of the Li family village gathered in groups of 2s and 3s, discussing in low voices. Are these nobles really here to see Scholar Li? That old man called himself, this old servant. Could it be that Scholar Li was also from a wealthy family? Do you even need to ask? If he wasn't from a wealthy family, how could he have so many attendants on horseback and armed with swords? The first time I saw Scholar Li, I knew he wasn't an ordinary person. Of course, my second son was working in a tailor's shop at that time. He said that the clothes on Scholar Li were enough for us to eat for several years. And that lady from the Li family, she was so pretty and well-mannered, but what a pity. The villagers spoke one after another, fully unleashing their imaginations. Gossiping was human nature, especially for these uneducated villagers who liked to squat under the locust tree at the entrance of the village and gossip when they had nothing to do. In just a short while, several versions of Scholar Li's story had circulated. Some time ago, a brothel had been built on an empty plot of land not far from the village. The villagers who had nothing to do would sometimes go there to listen to the stories. At this time, the storytellers had mixed the stories together and created a new and moving story. The lady of the Li family was originally the daughter of a rich and powerful family. In order to resist the marriage arranged by her family, she eloped with her lover and escaped thousands of miles away. To avoid being found by her family, she lived in seclusion in such a remote mountain village. She lived a simple life with tea, rice, oil and salt. She hid for 10 years until the couple passed away. 20 years had passed and the lady's family had declined, while the lover's family had risen day by day. Now the lover's family had finally found traces of the couple and happily wanted to bring them back. However, they could only lament at the lonely grave. What a sad story. Of course, the story did not end here. The woman's family, who had previously suppressed the couple, did not expect that 20 years later, the young Mrs. Child would become a great person and be personally rewarded by His Majesty. In just a few years he rose to the top and was ranked in the imperial court. When he learned of his parents' past, he flew into a rage and swore to clear the name of his parents. Yep, I'll write it like this. If I sell it to the theater, I'll be able to earn quite a bit of money. The head of the Li family sighed and patted the old man's shoulder. The world is unpredictable. My condolences, old brother. Suppressing the images that appeared in his memory once again, the old man wiped away his tears with his sleeves and looked at the village head with a smile. "Old brother, can you tell me about what happened to him during these years?" "Of course, that's not a problem." The village head nodded and stroked the beard on his chin. A look of reminiscence appeared on his old face as he slowly said, "This matter we have to start from 20 years ago. When I first saw them, I knew that they were not ordinary people. I'm afraid that they came from some incredible place. At first they didn't know how to do farm work. In the end, my son couldn't stand it anymore and went to help." As the village head spoke, the bitterness on the old man's face deepened. Although the Li family could not be considered a wealthy family 20 years ago when the husband was still alive, the young master, as the eldest grandson of the direct line of descent, had lived a life of luxury since young. When had he ever suffered like this? One could imagine what kind of life he had led all these years. The wife of the Li family passed away early. Scholar Li raised the child by himself until he was over 10 years old before he passed away. "That child is very promising." "Child?" The old man grabbed the village head's arm and asked excitedly, "Young master has a child?" The village head nodded and said, "If he doesn't have a child, I'm afraid that when the wife of the Li family passed away, Scholar Li followed her." The old man with the surname Li was no longer concerned about why he did not find out that the young master had a child in the household office yesterday. He hurriedly asked, "Where is the child now?" Li Yi busied himself in the kitchen. Ever since Xiao Huan inherited some of his culinary skills, Li Yi rarely came to the kitchen. Eggs. Sugar. Milk. Li Yi used chopsticks to stir in a large bowl while Xiao Huan helped him. The ingredients and steps to make butter were very simple. However, milk was not easy to find. People in this era did not drink it often. It took Li Yi a lot of effort to find a small jar of milk. Without light butter, he could only settle for the next best thing. After tasting it with chopsticks, he found that it was sweet. Of course, the taste could not be compared to real butter, but it was passable. "Young master, is it delicious?" The servant girl blinked her eyes and looked at him. "If you want to eat it, go get a spoon yourself. Remember not to eat too much or you'll get fat." Li Yi could tell what she was thinking at a glance and waved his hand. He got some butter on his hand and planned to go out and get some water to wash it. Rui's birthday was coming up soon. He originally planned to make a butter cake, but he did not have enough ingredients and tools. If he made it too ugly, it would have the opposite effect. So Li Yi decided to make a new plan. After wiping his hands and returning to the kitchen, he saw that Mississippi Lu was also eating the butter with a spoon. He walked over and shook his head. "That's not how you eat butter." Xiao Huan raised her head and looked at him in confusion. "Didn't the young master just tell him to eat it with a spoon? First you have to wash your hands." Li Yi raised his hands and scooped a spoonful of butter into his palm. He shook it in front of Mississippi Lu. Under her confused and curious gaze, he quickly smeared the butter on her pretty face. Because they were too close, Mississippi Lu was waiting for Li Yi to tell her how to eat it. Before she could react, Li Yi's figure had already disappeared from the kitchen. "Haha, this is the correct way to use butter." Bang! An arrogant laughter came from outside the door. Mississippi Lu's beautiful eyes were full of anger. She bent two fingers slightly and the wooden spoon broke into two halves in her hand. "Ah, second miss, your face." Xiao Huan looked at her and laughed. After Lu Rui glared at her, she immediately covered her mouth and smiled from her eyes. Li Yi walked out of the yard in a happy mood. Considering her face, Mississippi Lu would definitely wash her face before coming out. At that time he might have almost reached the county government office. Life should be fun like this. Occasionally, it was a good thing to let Mississippi Lu, who only knew how to make trouble for him, suffer. Humming a light tune, he couldn't help but be stunned when he walked out of the door. "Uncle Li, why are you here?" Li Yi looked at the Li family's villager standing at the door and asked in confusion. "Your Excellency, why did you move here? If it weren't for Arrestor Lu, I wouldn't have found this place." The villager said with a smile. There were two other people standing beside the villager. Before Li Yi could say anything, the old man on the right suddenly became extremely excited and murmured, Yes, it must be him. He looks 70% similar to young master when he was young. His eyes are so lively. He must have taken after Miss He." The old man suddenly took a step forward and grabbed Li Yi's arm. He looked him up and down. Because he was too excited, even his voice was trembling. What are you doing? Seeing a man grabbing his son-in-law at the door from a distance, Fong strode over and shouted harshly. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.